The night Lady Beatrice Vale learned she was to be married off like a debt no one wished to name, the storm had already begun tearing at the windows of Valehurst. Rain struck the glass in hard silver lines, blurring the black lawns beyond the drawing-room and making the old house seem as though it were dissolving into the dark. Beatrice stood in the passage outside her uncle's study with one gloved hand pressed to the wall, not because she meant to listen, but because her name had stopped her as surely as a hand at her throat. "Beatrice will do as she is told," Lord Percival Vale said from behind the closed door. His voice had the soft, polished calm he used at dinner tables and funerals. "Her mother's settlement remains under my authority. If she wishes to keep a roof, gowns, carriage, and respectability, she will accept Sir Alistair before Michaelmas." A second voice, smoother and younger, answered with amusement. "She may object." Beatrice knew Sir Alistair Morden's tone before she knew his words. He always sounded as though the world had been arranged for his convenience, and people were only furniture placed too near his elbow. "She has objected to everything quietly for years." Percival gave a low laugh. "Quiet objections do not trouble me." Beatrice's breath came slowly, painfully. For 24 years she had been taught that a lady did not press her ear to a door, did not interrupt men in business, did not confuse fear with intuition, and did not mistake a household's coldness for cruelty if that household clothed her. She had obeyed those lessons until obedience had become a kind of silence. Tonight the silence broke. "And the letter?" Sir Alistair asked. "If she has opened it." For the first time, Percival did not answer at once. The pause was so sharp that Beatrice felt it under her ribs. "She has not," her uncle said. Her mother filled her head with delicate nonsense, but Beatrice has no courage for scandal. She will not open a dead woman's warning unless forced. Beatrice looked down at the small reticule hanging from her wrist. Beneath a folded handkerchief and a worn prayer book lay the letter her mother had placed in her hands 2 weeks before dying. The seal had once been blue, though time had faded it to the color of a winter morning. Beatrice had carried it for 6 years without breaking it. She had told herself that restraint was loyalty. She had told herself that some truths were kinder when left sleeping. Then Percival spoke again. "Once she is Morden's wife, no one will care what Lady Helen Vale wrote in a fever. Harrowmere's name will remain buried, as it should have remained from the beginning." Harrowmere. The word moved through the passage like a draught from an open tomb. Beatrice had heard that name since childhood, always with a change in voices, always with a lowering of eyes. The Duke of Harrowmere had been her family's sworn enemy before she was old enough to understand what an enemy was. She had been taught that House Harrowmere was proud, treacherous, and unforgiving. She had never been taught why the story required so much careful repetition. Behind the door, a chair scraped. Beatrice stepped back, heart pounding, and turned just as Lady Cecily Vale appeared at the far end of the passage. Her cousin wore pale rose silk and a smile too light for the hour. "Beatrice," Cecily said softly. "What are you doing outside my father's study?" Beatrice closed her hand over the reticule. "Looking for my shawl." Cecily's gaze dropped to the small bag. "In the passage." "I was mistaken." The lie was poor. They both knew it. Cecily came closer, her slippers soundless on the runner. "You look as though you have seen a ghost." "Perhaps Valehurst has more than one." Cecily's smile thinned. "Do not be dramatic. It does not suit women with no independent fortune." The words were spoken gently, which made them worse. Beatrice had spent most of her life being wounded by gentle things. A suggestion at breakfast. A correction before guests. A dress offered because Cecily no longer favored it. A compliment that carried the shape of a leash. "I am tired," Beatrice said. "Then sleep." Cecily leaned near enough that the perfume of violets turned the air sweet and suffocating. "And do remember that Papa dislikes locked doors. If you have something that belongs to the family, it would be foolish to hide it." Beatrice did not answer. She curtsied because dignity was the last language left to her, then walked away without haste. She did not run until she reached her room. There, with rain rattling the panes and thunder rolling beyond the moors, she dismissed her maid on the excuse of a headache, locked the door, and took out the letter. The paper had softened at the edges from years of handling. Her mother's hand lay across the front, delicate but certain. "For my daughter, when silence becomes more dangerous than truth." Beatrice's fingers trembled. She could have broken the seal then. She could have sat beside the little fire and read whatever had frightened Lord Percival into marrying her off with such haste. Instead, footsteps sounded in the corridor. Men's footsteps, heavier than a maid's. She slipped the letter back into the reticule, took her plainest cloak from the peg, and moved before courage could retreat. 10 minutes later, she crossed the servants' stair with her hood drawn low. 20 minutes later, she stood in the stable yard while rain soaked through the hem of her gown and the old coachman stared at her as though she had lost all reason. "Lady Beatrice, I can't take you out in this." "You can," she said, pressing 3 coins into his palm. "And you will. Only as far as the North Road. Lord Percival will dismiss me. Then say I ordered you." The coachman looked toward the house, where light still burned behind the study curtains. "And where shall I say you meant to go?" Beatrice looked past the yard, past the wet stone walls, toward the darkness where the county road vanished between dripping hedges. She had no aunt nearby who would defy Percival. No brother. No husband. No friend close enough to receive a ruined woman in the middle of a storm. Only one name stood beyond her family's reach, and it was the one name she had been taught never to trust. "Toward Win-thorpe," she said. The coachman crossed himself before he remembered he was Anglican. "Your ladyship, that is Harrowmere land." "I know. The Duke will not open his door to a Vale. Then he will refuse me under his own roof, not my uncle's." That was the first brave sentence she had spoken all night, and it frightened her more than the thunder. The carriage lurched from the stable yard with its lamps swinging wildly, wheels biting into mud as Valehurst fell behind them. Beatrice sat alone inside, one hand on the reticule, the other gripping the worn leather strap until her glove creased. Every few minutes lightning showed the countryside in broken white pieces, a stone wall, a field gate, the black toss of trees, a narrow bridge foaming beneath the rain. She had travelled this road in daylight for calls and church festivals, yet tonight every mile felt like a confession. She was not simply leaving home. She was stepping out of the story her family had written for her. At first, the coachman muttered to the horses and drove with grim determination. Then, 3 miles from Valehurst, one wheel struck a deep rut. The carriage jolted sideways. Beatrice caught herself against the seat as the horses whinnied and the coach came to a grinding halt. "Stay inside, my lady," the coachman called. His voice was nearly swallowed by the rain. She waited, counting her breaths. 1, 2, 3. Outside came a curse quickly turned into a prayer. The door opened, and the coachman's face appeared beneath a streaming hat. "The wheel is cracked. I can lead the horses back, but the carriage will not go on." "How far to Win-thorpe Hall?" "Near 2 miles by the lower road." 2 miles. In rain. In darkness. Toward a man who might hate her blood more than he pitied her danger. Behind them, faint across the storm, another lantern appeared. Then a second. Beatrice saw the coachman look over his shoulder, and fear passed over his lined face. "That will be Valehurst," he said. They have followed. For one breath, all the old lessons rose within her. Return. Apologize. Explain nothing. Endure. Let men decide what name to give your obedience. Then lightning struck somewhere beyond the ridge, and the whole road flashed bright enough for Beatrice to see the reticule in her lap, darkened by rain that had seeped through the carriage door. The blue wax had begun to blur. She stepped down into the mud. "Unharness the horses and go," she told the coachman. "Say the carriage failed. Say nothing more. Lady Beatrice, I can't leave you." The lanterns behind them grew clearer. A male voice called her name through the rain, not with concern, but with ownership. Beatrice lifted her chin. "You can leave me my choice." The coachman stared at her for one aching moment, then bowed as if she were already someone society had been wrong to overlook. Beatrice turned toward the lower road. Rain struck her face. Mud pulled at her slippers. The wind dragged her cloak sideways until it snapped like a torn banner. She walked anyway. She walked past the broken carriage, past the widening glow of Valehurst lanterns, past the last invisible boundary of the life in which she had been obedient enough to be used. By the time the gates of Win-thorpe Hall rose from the dark, Her gown was heavy, her hair had come loose beneath her hood, and the letter in her reticule felt as fragile as a heart held too long in secret. The house beyond the iron gates was vast and severe, its windows lit in narrow gold, its stone front standing against the storm as though it had survived worse than weather. Beatrice had imagined Harrowmere's home 100 times as a child, always as a fortress of pride, never as the only light left to her. Behind her, wheels sounded on the flooded road. Someone from Valehurst shouted, "Lady Beatrice! Stop this instant!" She did not turn. She crossed the drive, climbed the front steps, and lifted the brass knocker with both hands because one had begun to shake. For a moment she could not bring it down. Her mother's words seemed to rise from the wet paper at her wrist. "If Harrowmere becomes your last refuge." Beatrice struck the door. Once. Twice. The sound carried through the house like judgment. Locks shifted. Bolts drew back. The door opened, and warm light spilled over her ruined cloak, her pale face, and the name she had been born to carry like a sentence. An elderly butler stared at her, his expression changing from duty to recognition to alarm. "Lady Beatrice Vale," she said, before her courage failed. "I ask shelter from the storm." Behind her, the Valehurst lanterns reached the foot of the drive. The butler's hand tightened on the door. His gaze moved past her to the road, then back to her face, and all the old hatred between two houses seemed to gather in the silence. For one suspended moment, Lady Beatrice Vale stood between the storm and the house that had been raised to despise her. Warmth reached her first, carrying the scent of beeswax, coal smoke, and old polished oak. Then came the butler's silence. He did not step aside. His hand remained on the edge of the door, his spine as straight as a church pillar, his face pale with a recognition that had nothing to do with hospitality. Behind Beatrice, the lanterns from Valehurst jolted nearer along the flooded drive. She heard wheels, hooves, a man calling her name as if it were property being reclaimed. She did not turn. If she turned, she feared the old obedient would find her face. "Please," she said, and hated that the word trembled. "I do not ask welcome. Only shelter." The butler's gaze moved to her ruined cloak, the mud on her hem, the wet hair clinging at her cheek. Something human passed through his expression, but it was quickly smothered by training, loyalty, and the terrible weight of a family name. "My lady," he said at last, "this is Win-thorpe Hall. I know where I am. His Grace receives no one from Valehurst." The answer was quiet. It still struck like a door closing. Beatrice felt the rain slide from her hood to the back of her neck. The reticule at her wrist had grown heavy with water, and beneath its soaked silk lay the letter her uncle feared, the letter her mother had left like a hand reaching through the grave. Behind her, the first carriage stopped near the steps. A groom jumped down into the rain. Another man followed. "Lady Beatrice," called Mr. Pritchard, Lord Percival's steward, his voice bright with false concern. "Your uncle is beside himself. Come away at once." The butler's eyes flickered again. Beatrice saw what he saw. A woman alone at night. Men behind her. A name despised before her. A scandal waiting to be shaped by whoever spoke first. She lifted her chin, though her knees felt dangerously uncertain. "If his Grace refuses me, I will hear it from him." "That will not be necessary," Pritchard called, mounting the steps. "She is overwrought." Lord Percival expected some display, but not this. "Stand aside, man." The butler's mouth tightened at being addressed so. He did not move. Before he could answer, a voice came from within the hall. "Who is at my door in this weather?" The words were not loud, but they changed the air. The butler straightened. The servants visible beyond him seemed to vanish into stillness. Beatrice looked past the man's shoulder and saw a figure descend the broad staircase, dressed in dark evening clothes without ornament, one hand resting lightly on the rail. Adrian Vane, Duke of Harrowmere, did not hurry. He did not need to. Authority moved with him as naturally as shadow follows flame. He was taller than she expected, leaner, younger than the portrait of his late father that gossip had fixed in her imagination. His face was controlled to the point of severity, with dark hair slightly disturbed as if he had been interrupted at work rather than leisure. His eyes went first to the butler, then to the men on the steps, then to Beatrice. They stopped there. Not on her wet gown. Not on the mud. On her face. "Halcombe," he said. "Explain." The butler bowed. "Lady Beatrice Vale, Your Grace." The name landed in the hall. A maid near the corridor drew in a breath. Somewhere deeper in the house, a footman went utterly still. Beatrice felt heat rise beneath the cold rain on her skin. She had never been ashamed of her name before tonight. She had resented it, obeyed it, carried it, but shame was new. The Duke's expression did not alter, yet something in his eyes sharpened. "Vale," he repeated. Pritchard seized the silence like a man catching a coin. "Yes, Your Grace, and my apologies for this disturbance. Lady Beatrice has left home in a state of distress. Her uncle requests that she be returned immediately before any unfortunate rumor can take root." "Does he?" "Indeed. This matter is private." The Duke descended the final step. "Then why have you brought it to my front door with lanterns and raised voices?" Pritchard's smile faltered. "Her ladyship is not herself." Beatrice's fingers tightened around the reticule. The phrase entered the hall softly, politely, and with practiced violence. Not herself. Unsettled. Overwrought. Words that made a woman's truth sound like weather. The Duke noticed. She knew it because his gaze returned to her, steady and unreadable. "Lady Beatrice," he said, "are you injured?" "No, Your Grace." Her voice held. "Barely. Were you brought here against your will?" "No. Do you wish to leave with these men?" Pritchard stepped forward. "Your Grace, she cannot be expected to answer sensibly while in such a condition." The Duke did not look at him. "I asked Lady Beatrice." The hall went silent enough for the rain to become thunderous. Beatrice swallowed. The truth stood before her like a drop from a height. Once spoken, it could not be gathered back. "No," she said. "I do not wish to leave with them." Pritchard's color changed. "My lady, think carefully." "I have." The Duke turned then, not quickly, but with such precision that Pritchard took half a step back. "You will not threaten a lady on my threshold." "Threaten?" "Your Grace, I merely meant, I heard what you meant." The Duke's voice remained calm. That made it colder. "You may inform Lord Percival Vale that his niece entered my house seeking shelter from a storm. She will not be dragged from it like a parcel misdirected by a carrier." Pritchard stared. "You cannot mean to keep her here." "I mean to keep rain off her head until morning. If Lord Percival finds that radical, he may write to me at dawn. Her reputation was endangered by the men shouting her name in my drive." The words cut cleanly. A faint movement passed through the servants in the hall. Not approval. Servants in great houses were too well trained for that. But attention shifted. The story was changing shape before their eyes. Pritchard tried once more. "Your Grace, there are old matters between your house and hers." "There are." For the first time, the Duke's gaze darkened in a way Beatrice felt rather than saw. "They are not settled by leaving a woman in the rain." He looked to the butler. "Halcombe, open the door properly." The butler obeyed at once. The great door widened. Warm light spilled over the steps and over the two Valehurst men, who now appeared smaller than they had under their lanterns. Beatrice stood motionless. After years of being ordered, arranged, corrected, and contained, she did not understand an open door when it was offered without bargain. The Duke's eye softened by nothing more than a fraction. "Come in, Lady Beatrice." She crossed the threshold. No one touched her. That mattered. It mattered so much that she nearly lost her composure. The marble beneath her wet slippers was cold, but the air inside wrapped around her shaking body, and for the first time in an hour, the storm was behind her instead of above her. Halcombe closed the door halfway, leaving only enough space for the Duke to address the men outside. "You will return to Valehurst," he said. "You will tell Lord Percival that Lady Beatrice is under my roof, attended by my household, and safe. Mrs. Wren will sit with her tonight. At first light, I will send for Lady Rowena March to serve as proper chaperone. There will be no impropriety in this house unless someone chooses to invent it." Pritchard bowed stiffly, trapped by rank and witness. "As your Grace commands." "Not as I command." as decency requires. The door closed on the steward's face. The sound of rain dulled at once, as if the whole world had stepped back. Beatrice remained in the center of the hall, dripping onto the marble, surrounded by ancestral portraits whose painted eyes seemed to ask what a veil was doing among them. Her courage, having carried her only this far, began to loosen. The edges of the room blurred. The Duke saw it before she swayed. "A chair," he said. A footman moved. "No," Beatrice said quickly, because sitting felt too close to surrender. "Forgive me. I have brought mud into your hall." The Duke looked down at the floor, then back at her. Marble survives weather. The smallest, strangest laugh almost escaped her. It turned into a breath instead. "Your Grace, I did not come to entangle you in a family matter." "That is fortunate. Family matters have a way of entangling themselves without assistance." His gaze dropped, not rudely, but with sudden focus, to her reticule. The soaked silk had pulled open slightly. Beneath the edge of her hand, the faded blue wax showed. Beatrice saw the instant he recognized it. He became very still. Not surprised. Not merely curious. Struck. "Where did you get that?" he asked. The question was quiet, but every servant in the hall seemed to disappear behind it. Beatrice closed her fingers over the seal. "From my mother. Lady Helen Vale." "Yes." The Duke looked at the reticule as if the small ruined letter had crossed more than a county road. As if it had crossed years. When he spoke again, the coldness had changed. It was still there, but now it guarded something wounded. "Mrs. Wren," he said without turning. An elderly housekeeper appeared from the corridor. A room with a fire. Dry clothing. Tea. "Send a rider to Lady Rowena March, no matter the hour. Ask her to come as soon as the roads permit." "Yes, Your Grace." He returned his attention to Beatrice. "No one will ask you for that letter tonight." Her throat tightened. "My uncle will." "Your uncle is not here." The words were simple. They entered her like warmth. Mrs. Wren came forward, kind-eyed and practical, holding out a shawl. Beatrice accepted it with both hands. The Duke stepped aside to let her pass, maintaining the distance propriety demanded, yet somehow the space between them felt less like suspicion than shelter. At the foot of the stairs, she paused. "Your Grace." He looked up. "Thank you." For a moment, he said nothing. Rain struck the windows beyond the hall. Somewhere outside, the Valehurst carriage turned away into the storm. Then the Duke answered, "Don't thank me for a door that should never have been closed." Beatrice followed Mrs. Wren up the stairs, the wet letter pressed against her palm and the blue wax hidden beneath her glove. Below, in the great hall of Harrowmere, the Duke remained motionless until her footsteps faded. Only then did he look toward the closed front door, his face hardening into something older than anger. "Halcombe," he said. "At dawn, send for my solicitor." By morning, the storm had spent its fury but not its consequence. Rain still clung to the windows of Win-thorpe Hall in trembling lines, and the long breakfast room looked out upon lawns beaten silver-grey by the night. Lady Beatrice Vale entered with Mrs. Wren beside her, wearing a dark blue gown borrowed from some forgotten wardrobe and pinned carefully at the shoulder where it did not quite fit. Her own dress had been taken away to dry, along with the cloak that still carried half the road from Valehurst in its hem. Only the reticule remained with her. She had slept with it beneath her pillow, one hand resting on it whenever the house creaked or the wind moved in the chimneys. Sleep had come in pieces. Each time she woke, she had expected to hear her uncle's voice in the corridor. Instead, she heard only the disciplined quiet of a house that did not yet know what to do with her. The Duke of Harrowmere was already standing near the sideboard when she entered. He did not turn at once. He was reading a folded paper, his posture so still that he might have been carved into the room by some ancestor who prized command above comfort. Then he looked up. For one brief moment, his gaze moved over the borrowed gown, the carefully arranged hair, the face she had tried to make calm. He noticed everything. He remarked on nothing. "Lady Beatrice," he said. "I trust Mrs. Wren found you what was needed." "She found more kindness than I had any right to expect." "Kindness is not a debt. You need not calculate it." The answer unsettled her because it was not gallant. It was precise. Men had offered Beatrice compliments before when society required them, and Sir Alistair had offered praises that always left fingerprints. The Duke offered facts, and somehow those facts made it harder to breathe. Mrs. Wren moved toward the door, but it opened before she reached it. A lady entered with a travelling cloak over her arm and rain still shining on the brim of her bonnet. She was perhaps 50, elegant in the severe way of women who had survived grief without permitting it to make them soft in public. The Duke crossed the room at once. "Lady Rowena. You came quickly. Your rider said the matter concerned an unmarried lady under your roof after midnight. I assumed speed was preferable to sleep." Her eyes moved to Beatrice, sharp but not unkind. "You must be Lady Beatrice Vale." Beatrice curtsied. "I am sorry to have disturbed you, my lady." "My dear, women who apologize for needing protection usually do so because someone has trained them to confuse inconvenience with sin." Beatrice looked down before the words could reach too deeply. Lady Rowena removed her gloves. "I am Adrian's cousin by marriage, widowed these 12 years, old enough to bore scandal and respectable enough to inconvenience it. I will remain as chaperone until this matter has a shape." The Duke's mouth almost moved. "Lady Rowena has a talent for making society sound like furniture." "Society often has less moral use than furniture," Lady Rowena replied. "Furniture at least supports someone." Beatrice felt the smallest warmth rise in her chest. It vanished when the breakfast room door opened again and Halcombe appeared with a silver salver. One letter lay upon it. The direction was bold, black, and familiar. Beatrice knew her uncle's hand before the Duke lifted the page. The room changed around that letter. Lady Rowena sat, Mrs. Wren withdrew, and Halcombe remained near the door with the trained expression of a man pretending not to hear history rearrange itself. The Duke broke the seal. He read in silence. Beatrice watched his face for signs of anger and found something worse. "Contempt, carefully leashed. Lord Percival writes," he said, "that you left Valehurst in a state of nervous disorder. He expresses concern for your health, your reputation, and the distress caused to his household." "How generous of him to arrange them in that order," Lady Rowena said. The Duke continued. "He requests your immediate return. He further states that your late mother's marriage settlement remains under his trusteeship and that any continued defiance may affect your maintenance." Beatrice had expected the words. Still, they found their mark. Maintenance. Such a small word for food, clothing, roof, paper, ink, a seat in a carriage, the permission to exist without appearing desperate. Her mother's money had been spoken of as protection when Beatrice was a child. In Lord Percival's hands, it had become a leash covered in legal ribbon. "He also suggests," the Duke said, his voice colder now, "that any papers you may have removed from Valehurst should be returned unopened." Lady Rowena looked at Beatrice's reticule. She did not ask. That courtesy nearly undid Beatrice. The Duke folded the letter once and set it beside his plate. "Is there a paper, Lady Beatrice?" Beatrice closed her fingers around the small bag. Every lesson of Valehurst rose again. Do not expose the family. Do not speak where men can deny you. Do not put a dead mother's name into a quarrel between powerful houses. Yet the Duke had not asked as Percival would have asked. He had not said, "Give it to me." He had asked whether it existed. "Yes," she said. "My mother left it for me." "Have you read it?" "Not fully." "Why not?" The question was not accusing, but it opened the door to an old shame. Beatrice looked toward the rain-bright windows. Because when a woman is told all her life that peace depends upon her silence, she begins to believe that truth is a selfish luxury. Lady Rowena was very still. The Duke's expression altered by a fraction, and Beatrice knew he had understood more than she intended to give. "My mother told me to open it only when silence became more dangerous than truth," Beatrice continued. "Last night, I heard my uncle speak of marrying me to Sir Alistair Morden. I heard him say that once I was Morden's wife, no one would care what Lady Helen Vale wrote." "Morden," the Duke repeated. "A convenient friend of your uncle's. A convenient man in every room he enters." The Duke accepted that with a grim flicker that might almost have been approval. "May I ask what the letter concerns?" Beatrice drew out the folded paper. The blue wax had blurred at the edges, but enough remained to show its old color. The Duke's hand tightened on the back of a chair. He did not reach for it. That restraint mattered. It allowed her to break the seal herself. The paper opened with a faint, tired sound. Her mother's handwriting appeared, faded in places where the rain had touched it, but still graceful, still alive with a presence Beatrice had missed so sharply that for a moment she could not read. Lady Rowena rose and came to stand beside her, not too close. The Duke remained across the table. Beatrice forced her voice to steady. "My dearest Beatrice, if you are reading this, then I have failed to protect you by silence. I had hoped never to place the burden of old sins in your hands, but there are debts that are not debts, and accusations that were born from forgery." The word seemed to strike the walls. The Duke went motionless. Beatrice read on, but the next lines blurred from rain damage and time. Only fragments survived. "The Harrowmere account book, your father was told one story." Percival altered, her voice thinned. She stopped, blinking hard. The Duke spoke quietly. "Does it name my father?" Beatrice looked down. A line near the fold had survived with cruel clarity. The late Duke of Harrowmere did not sign what they claimed he signed. Silence filled the breakfast room. It did not feel empty. It felt crowded with the dead. The Duke turned toward the window, his face in profile, the morning light sharpening every controlled line. For years, Beatrice had heard his house condemned. She had imagined the Duke would seize any chance to condemn hers in return. Instead, he looked as though something long buried had moved beneath his feet. "Your Grace," she said, "I do not know what it means." "Nor do I," he answered. "But Lord Percival seems eager that we not learn." Lady Rowena returned to her chair with the decisiveness of a woman who had seen enough polite ruin to recognize its machinery. "Then the letter remains here, with Lady Beatrice, until a proper copy can be made and a solicitor can examine whatever papers still exist." Beatrice looked at the Duke. "My uncle will say I stole it." "Did you?" "No, then we begin there." Such simple words. Such impossible ground. Halcombe appeared again, as if summoned by the shape of necessity. The Duke did not take his eyes from Beatrice. "Send for Mr. Calder, my solicitor. Immediately. And have a note prepared for Lord Percival Vale. Inform him that Lady Beatrice is safe, properly attended by Lady Rowena March, and not available to be removed by threat, implication, or concern dressed as authority." Halcombe bowed. "Yes, Your Grace." Beatrice felt the room tilt toward a future she had not planned. Protection had been offered. So had danger? If the letter spoke truth, then she had not merely run from an unwanted marriage. She had carried a match into a room soaked in old oil. "Your Grace," she said, "I do not wish to be the cause of renewed hatred between your house and mine." The Duke looked at the blue wax, then at her. Hatred renewed by truth was never buried honorably in the first place. Lady Rowena poured tea with a steady hand. "Now, Lady Beatrice, you will eat something. Scandal is always worse on an empty stomach." Beatrice almost smiled, but the expression faltered when she heard wheels outside on the wet drive. All three of them turned toward the window. A carriage had stopped before the house. It was not Lord Percival's. It bore the crest of Morden. The Duke's face closed like a door being locked. "It appears," he said, "that your uncle's concern travels quickly when it rides in another man's carriage." Sir Alistair Morden entered Win-thorpe Hall as if weather, distance, and another man's threshold were minor inconveniences arranged for his theatrical arrival. He had not waited to be received in the ordinary way. Halcombe announced him with visible reluctance, and a moment later Sir Alistair stepped into the breakfast room carrying his gloves in one hand, his coat still damp at the shoulders, his smile polished bright enough to make concern look like performance. Lady Beatrice felt the room narrow. Only an hour ago, she had believed the worst danger lay behind her, on the flooded road from Valehurst. Now it stood within 10 feet of her, smelling faintly of rain, leather, and lavender water. "My dear Lady Beatrice," Sir Alistair said, crossing the room without invitation. "Thank heaven. We've been half mad with worry." The Duke of Harrowmere moved before Beatrice could answer. It was not a dramatic movement. He merely stepped aside from the window and placed himself between Sir Alistair and her chair with such natural command that the other man was forced to stop. "Sir Alistair," the Duke said, "you are a guest only because my butler admitted you before I had reason to refuse." The smile flickered. "Your Grace, I come on behalf of Lord Percival Vale." "Then Lord Percival has a habit of sending the wrong men on personal errands." Lady Rowena set her teacup down with a small click. "Especially before luncheon." Sir Alistair bowed, though the movement held more annoyance than respect. "Lady Rowena, I am relieved to find you here. You will understand the delicacy of the matter." Lady Beatrice left her uncle's house in a state of agitation. Lord Percival fears she may be influenced by old grief, romantic notions, and certain family papers never meant to distress her. Beatrice heard the trap close around each word. Agitation. Grief. Distress. Not lies loud enough to challenge, only soft enough to spread. She rose slowly. "I am not distressed by paper, Sir Alistair. I am distressed by men deciding what truth I am permitted to read." His eyes narrowed, then warmed falsely. "Beatrice, you need not perform bravery here. I'm your friend." "You are not." The words came out quieter than she expected, but the silence that followed made them stronger. The Duke did not look at her. That restraint felt like respect. Sir Alistair's gaze sharpened. "We have an understanding. We have no contract. Lord Percival intended to speak with you formally within the week. Lord Percival intended many things without asking me." Sir Alistair's smile returned, colder at the edges. "A lady in your circumstances should be cautious about refusing protection." The Duke's voice cut in. "A lady in this house already has it." Sir Alistair turned to him. "With respect, Your Grace, that is precisely the difficulty. Your protection will be misunderstood. A veil under a Harrowmere roof is not a domestic detail. It is a match to dry straw. Then perhaps those carrying straw should take greater care near candles." Sir Alistair's eyes moved to the table, and Beatrice saw the moment he noticed the opened letter. His face did not change enough for accusation, but colour left his mouth. "That paper belongs to Lord Percival." Beatrice folded her fingers over it. "It belonged to my mother. Lady Helen was unwell. Do not speak of my mother as if death made her convenient." Sir Alistair took one step toward her. The Duke did not raise his voice. "Stop. One word." The room obeyed it. Sir Alistair paused, then gave a short laugh. "I beg your pardon. The matter has unsettled us all." "It has not unsettled me," the Duke said. "That is why you should choose your next sentence with care." Lady Rowena leaned back in her chair, watching Sir Alistair as one might watch a stain spreading across silk. "You came to retrieve Lady Beatrice or the letter." "I came to prevent scandal." "How noble. Men who arrive uninvited at breakfast often do." Sir Alistair's jaw tightened. "Lady Beatrice cannot remain here." "She can," the Duke said. "She will, until she decides otherwise. Her uncle will not permit it. Her uncle is not Duke of Harrowmere." The statement was mild. Its effect was not. Rank settled over the room like a door barred from within. Sir Alistair looked at Beatrice again, but now his concern had thinned into warning. "You are making enemies you do not understand." Beatrice felt the old reflex to look down, to soften, to smooth the dangerous air. She did not. "I was born among enemies I was ordered not to understand." For the first time since his arrival, Sir Alistair had no ready answer. The Duke turned to Halcombe, who had remained near the door. "Sir Alistair's carriage will be brought round." Sir Alistair's brows rose. "You dismiss me?" "No. I conclude your visit." "Your Grace, this will reach London." "Most foolish things do." The Duke stepped toward the table and placed his hand beside the letter, not on it. "You may inform Lord Percival that Lady Beatrice remains properly attended by Lady Rowena March. You may also inform him that any further claims concerning her person, her reputation, or her mother's papers will be answered by my solicitor." Sir Alistair glanced toward the letter once more. "There are matters in old families that suffer when strangers interfere. Then old families should have kept better consciences." Halcombe opened the door. Sir Alistair bowed stiffly to Lady Rowena, then to Beatrice. His smile returned for her alone, quiet and unpleasantly intimate. "This isn't over, Beatrice," she answered before fear could steal the space. "No. It has only begun." The door closed behind him, and the sound seemed to release every breath in the room. Beatrice sat down because her legs demanded truth even when her pride wished otherwise. Lady Rowena poured fresh tea, though no one drank it. The Duke remained standing, his gaze fixed on the faded blue seal. "He knew the wax," he said. Beatrice looked up. "So did you?" The answer might have been a challenge. It came out as a plea. The Duke drew the chair opposite her and sat, slowly, as if the ordinary act required a decision. "My father used blue wax for correspondence that concerned Harrowmere accounts and estate obligations. After his death, several papers vanished. Others appeared with his hand upon them, or what men claimed was his hand. You believe they were forged?" "I believed many things at 22 because grief made anger simpler than doubt." His eyes remained on the seal. "For years, your uncle told the county that my father had accepted funds under false pretenses, then denied the debt. The disgrace did not ruin Harrowmere, but it followed my mother into mourning and my father into his grave." Beatrice could not move. The hatred she had inherited suddenly had dates, ink, signatures, and a room in which someone had first chosen to lie. "My mother wrote that the late Duke did not sign what they claimed." "Yes." His voice lowered. "And that means she knew the claim was false." Beatrice looked down at the damaged page. "Or feared it." Lady Rowena reached across the table and touched the edge of the paper with one gloved finger, careful not to take it. "Read what remains. Not all of it may be gone." Beatrice smoothed the letter. The rain had blurred whole lines into grey shadows, but fragments survived like islands after floodwater. "My dearest Beatrice," she read again, then moved lower. "I saw the account book before Percival locked it away. The entry was altered after Lord Harrowmere's refusal. The note shown to your father was not in the Duke's hand. The old steward Fenwick knew. There was a copy kept at, the next words had dissolved." Beatrice pressed her lips together. "I cannot read it." The Duke leaned closer, though still not close enough to crowd her. "May I?" She hesitated, then slid the paper toward him. Not because he demanded it. Because he had not. He studied the damaged line with a focus so complete that Beatrice understood how men under his authority must feel when he chose to see through them. "It may say Valehurst," he said. "Or Vault." "No, here. This letter begins with a V, but the next stroke is too tall." "Vain?" Lady Rowena asked. "No. The word after it is not Hall. It may be account book." He stopped. "Harrowmere account book." Beatrice's hands chilled despite the fire. "In Valehurst?" "Perhaps." He returned the letter to her. "Your mother believed a record survived. Then my uncle will destroy it. Only if he finds it before we know where to look." Lady Rowena's expression sharpened. "And he has already sent Morden to test whether Lady Beatrice brought anything away. That suggests panic, not confidence." The Duke nodded once. "Mr. Calder must see this today." "Your solicitor?" Beatrice asked. "Yes. But he will not take it from you. He will copy what can be read and advise what questions may be asked without putting you at needless risk." Beatrice looked at the man across from her, the enemy she had been taught to fear, and felt something more dangerous than gratitude. She felt the first fragile outline of trust. "Why help me?" she asked. "Because a woman came to my door in a storm. That explains shelter." "Not this." The Duke was silent for a moment. "Because if your mother told the truth, then my father died under a shadow that should never have touched him. And because if Lord Percival silenced her, he will try to silence you." The simplicity of it struck her harder than any declaration could have done. He was not pretending tenderness. He was choosing justice, and for now, justice included her. Outside, the last rain slid from the eaves. The storm had passed, but the house felt charged, as though thunder had entered its walls and decided to wait. Halcombe returned with a card on a tray. Your Grace. Sir Alistair has departed. He left this for Lady Beatrice. The Duke did not touch it. Halcombe brought it to her. The card bore Sir Alistair's name, and beneath it, in a hurried hand, one sentence had been written. London will enjoy hearing where you slept. Beatrice felt shame rise hot and immediate, but before it could claim her, the Duke reached for the bell. Then, he said, his voice quiet enough to be lethal, we shall make certain London hears from us first. By noon, Win-thorpe Hall had ceased pretending that Lady Beatrice Vale was merely a guest delayed by weather. The servants moved with the careful quiet of a household that understood a scandal might be standing in the corridor, drying its gloves. A maid carried fresh linen to the blue room with her eyes fixed on the floor. A footman who had seen Sir Alistair's card avoided looking at Beatrice altogether. Even the fire seemed to burn with restraint, as if flames too had been trained not to comment upon family disgrace. Beatrice sat beside the writing table while Lady Rowena sealed a note to an old acquaintance near York, a woman whose opinion mattered precisely because she never appeared eager to give it. Across the room, the Duke stood near the mantel with Sir Alistair's card between two fingers. He had read the sentence once. He had not needed to read it again. London will not wait, Lady Rowena said, pressing the seal into warm wax. If Morden has any wit, he will send his version by tonight's post. He has wit enough for malice, the Duke said. That is often more dangerous than intelligence. Beatrice looked down at her hands. Mrs. Wren had given her fresh gloves, but the gesture could not erase the memory of mud, rain, and men calling after her as though a woman alone must belong to whoever pursued her first. Perhaps I should leave, she said. The Duke turned at once. Lady Rowena did not. That difference told Beatrice something about them both. The Duke reacted to danger. Lady Rowena had survived it long enough to measure its shape before answering. And go where? The older lady asked. To your uncle, who wishes to silence you. To Sir Alistair, who wishes to own the story before you may speak. To some distant inn, where every servant would know your name by supper. Beatrice felt the rebuke, but not cruelty in it. I do not want this house harmed because I crossed its threshold. My dear, Lady Rowena said, finally looking up, this house has carried harm for years. Perhaps it is time someone opened a window. The Duke's expression did not soften, but the card in his hand bent slightly. You will remain under Lady Rowena's protection. Tonight, I will invite Sir Edmund Fallow, Mrs. Darby, and Lord Wexford to dine. Lady Rowena lifted one brow. An earl, a magistrate's widow, and the county's most incurious gossip. Very strategic. Mrs. Darby repeats only what she believes she discovered by accident. We shall help her discover that Lady Beatrice is properly attended, calm, and not being hidden. Beatrice looked at him then. You mean to display me? No, his reply came too quickly to be politeness. He paused, then corrected his tone. I mean to place witnesses around the truth before falsehood reaches them first. If you object, I will choose another course. That last sentence held her still. At Valehurst, plans had always been dressed as kindness after they had already been decided. Here, he had stopped at the edge of her consent and waited. It should not have moved her. It did. I do not object, she said. But I would prefer not to be examined like a cracked teacup. Lady Rowena's mouth curved. Then we shall make certain you are the finest porcelain in the room and everyone else fears being found chipped. A small sound escaped Beatrice before she could prevent it, almost a laugh, fragile but real. The Duke looked at her as if that sound had revealed more than tears would have done. Then, with sudden practicality, he said, Mrs. Wren mentioned that you wished for air before dinner. The East Gallery is warm in the afternoon. Lady Rowena, if you will accompany us? Gladly. Chaperones are most useful when men remember to request them before society does. They walked together through the long passage that led from the family rooms into the older wing. Beatrice had passed grand houses before, but Win-thorpe Hall did not feel built to impress guests. It felt built to endure them. The portraits along the gallery walls watched from gilt frames, generations of Vanes in dark coats, pale gowns, armor, hunting dress, and mourning black. Each face seemed to carry the same restrained severity, as though Harrowmere blood had learned early that tenderness should be locked away before enemies could value it. Beatrice kept her hands folded before her. She had expected hostility here. She had not expected grief. They were halfway down the gallery when she noticed the empty place. No, not empty. A frame leaned against the wall with its painted side turned inward, draped loosely in cloth. Dust marked the floor where it had once hung. That one was removed, she asked before caution could stop her. The Duke's gaze followed hers. Something closed behind his eyes. Turned. Not removed. Lady Rowena glanced at him. Adrian. It is only a portrait. No portrait in a family gallery is only a portrait. Beatrice should have let the matter drop. Every rule of courtesy required it. Yet the letter seemed to stir in her memory, and with it her mother's faded line about the account book, the note, and a truth hidden because silence had become useful to men. May I ask who it shows? The Duke was silent for so long that she regretted the question. Then he stepped forward and drew the cloth aside. My father. The portrait revealed a man in his middle years, broad-shouldered and grave, but not cold. There was fatigue around the eyes, and a softness in the mouth that the artist had not managed to flatter away. Beside him, painted in the background rather than as equal subject, stood a table stacked with books and subscription papers. At the edge of the canvas, almost hidden near a vase, was a folded blue ribbon. Beatrice moved closer without meaning to. That ribbon, she whispered. The Duke heard. What of it? My mother kept one like it in her prayer book. Lady Rowena came nearer. Blue ribbons were often used for charitable committees. It may mean nothing. Or it may mean that Lady Helen and my father sat on the same committee, the Duke said. He sounded as if every word cost him control. Beatrice leaned slightly, noticing marks on the back of the frame where the covering had slipped. There is writing. The Duke turned the portrait enough for the rear boards to catch the light. There, in brown ink, someone had written a date and several names. Harrowmere Relief Subscription, 1802. Beneath it appeared Lord Adrian Vane, Lady Helen Vale, Reverend Ambrose Pike, Mrs. Darby. Beatrice felt the corridor tilt. My mother knew him. Apparently. But I was told your father ruined mine. I was told your uncle's family slandered mine to escape an honest debt. Lady Rowena's voice was low. And yet here they were, working on the same charity. The Duke looked at the names. Why turn the portrait? Because it contradicted a useful hatred, Beatrice said. The words left her before she had considered them. She expected offense. Instead, the Duke looked at her with an intensity that made her aware of every inch of air between them. That is a dangerous observation. I have begun to suspect that harmless observations are the ones my uncle prefers. Before he could answer, a sharp sound came from the far end of the gallery. A maid had entered carrying a tray of clean glass chimneys for the lamps. One had slipped and broken at her feet. The girl went white. Forgive me, Your Grace. I am so sorry. I did not mean to interrupt. She crouched at once, gathering pieces with trembling hands. Beatrice saw the girl's panic before she saw the glass. At Valehurst, a broken object in the wrong room could become a week of punishment paid in cold looks, docked wages, and whispers below stairs. She crossed the space quickly. Do not touch the sharp edges with bare fingers. The maid froze. My lady. Use the cloth from the tray. Beatrice knelt carefully, taking the folded cloth and drawing the larger pieces together. There. No harm has been done. I broke His Grace's glass. Then His Grace is fortunate the glass broke instead of your hand. The maid looked past her, terrified. Beatrice followed the glance and found the Duke watching them. His face had changed, not openly, but enough. He had seen the maid's fear. He had seen Beatrice kneel without thinking. He had seen something she had not meant to display. Mrs. Wren will provide another chimney, he said. And you will have your hand checked before returning to work. The maid's eyes filled with relief. Yes, Your Grace. Thank you, Your Grace. Beatrice rose as the girl hurried away. Only then did she realize that dust clung to her borrowed gown. I have made Mrs. Wren's work harder. No, the Duke said. You made fear unnecessary. The compliment was not a compliment in the usual sense. It had no ornament, no flirtation, no charm. It was worse. It was honest. Beatrice looked away first. Lady Rowena, mercifully, pretended to study the portrait. The moment might have passed safely if Halcombe had not appeared at the gallery entrance with a salver. "Your Grace, a note has come from Vale Hurst." The Duke took it, read, and gave no visible reaction. That lack of reaction made Beatrice's pulse quicken. "Lord Percival?" she asked. No, he handed the note to Lady Rowena, but his eyes remained on Beatrice. "Lady Cecily has written to Mrs. Darby. She expresses deep concern that you may have mistaken gratitude for attachment, and shelter for invitation." Lady Rowena's face hardened. So the whisper has begun. Beatrice stood beside the turned portrait, with dust on her skirt and her mother's name on the back of a frame that should not have been hidden. Shame came, as it always did. This time, anger came with it. "Then let Mrs. Darby dine here," she said. "Let her see me." The Duke held her gaze. "Are you certain?" No, her voice trembled once, then steadied. "But I am more certain of this than I am of running." Something passed between them, quiet and dangerous. Not romance yet. Not trust fully. But recognition. The Duke turned to Halcombe. "Send the invitations. Dinner at 8. Then he looked again at the portrait, at the written names, and finally at Beatrice. "If they mean to turn you into a rumour, Lady Beatrice, we shall give the rumour witnesses." By 8 o'clock, the dining room of Win-thorpe Hall had been made too elegant for accusation and too formal for pity. That, Beatrice suspected, had been the Duke's intention. Candles burned in tall branches of silver. The polished table reflected glass, china, and restrained abundance. No arrangement of flowers stood high enough to hide a face. No chair had been placed without thought. Lady Rowena sat where no one could pretend Beatrice lacked a chaperone, and the Duke had seated Beatrice not at the foot like an embarrassment, nor too near himself like a provocation, but between Lady Rowena and Mrs. Darby, the magistrate's widow whose plain grey silk and bright eyes made her look harmless only to those who underestimated widows. Lord Wexford, a mild earl with excellent manners and a talent for hearing more than he admitted, occupied the Duke's right. Sir Edmund Fallow, a neighbour of old family and cautious speech, sat opposite. It was a small dinner by county standards. It felt to Beatrice like stepping into a courtroom made of candlelight. She had dressed in a cream gown that Mrs. Wren had altered in haste, with a narrow blue ribbon at the waist because Lady Rowena said one should never allow a rumour to choose one's colour. The blue had made Beatrice think of the wax seal of her mother's name on the back of the hidden portrait, and of all the years she had been told not to ask why old hatred required so many locked doors. She had left the letter upstairs in a small writing box, wrapped in linen and placed under Mrs. Wren's care. She had told herself it was safer there. Yet she felt its absence like a pulse missing from her wrist. Mrs. Darby was the first to strike, though she did it with a smile that could have belonged to a tea table. "Lady Beatrice, we were all distressed to hear of your difficulty last night. These storms can make even sensible roads quite treacherous." Beatrice felt every eye move toward her, even those polite enough to pretend otherwise. She set down her spoon carefully. "Yes, Mrs. Darby. A storm has little interest in family boundaries." Lord Wexford gave a soft sound that might have been approval. Sir Edmund looked at his plate as if potatoes had suddenly become fascinating. Mrs. Darby's brows lifted. A very composed view for a lady who suffered such inconvenience. "Inconvenience is a useful word," Beatrice said. "It keeps fear from making too grand an entrance." The Duke looked down at his glass, but she sensed his attention as surely as if his hand had steadied the back of her chair. He had not spoken for her. He had not rescued her from a question she could answer. That restraint gave her more courage than intervention would have done. Conversation resumed, gently redirected by Lady Rowena toward the condition of the South Road, the late harvest, and whether London had become too fond of Italian singers. For nearly 20 minutes, the dinner held. Beatrice breathed more easily. Then Halcombe entered and crossed to the Duke with a card on a salver. The Duke read it. His expression did not change, which Beatrice had begun to understand meant the news was unwelcome. "Show them in," he said. Lady Rowena's knife paused over her fish. "Them?" The dining room doors opened. Lady Cecily Vale entered on Sir Alastair Morden's arm, dressed in pale green silk and apology. Beatrice's cousin had perfected the art of appearing innocent after arranging injury. Her eyes widened at the room, at the candles, at the small assembly of county witnesses, then settled upon Beatrice with a softness that only Beatrice could read as triumph. "Your Grace," Cecily said, curtsying low. "Forgive this intrusion. Sir Alastair and I were passing near enough to leave a note, but when we saw lights, I feared I would be heartless not to ask after my dear cousin." Sir Alastair bowed. "We would not dream of disturbing dinner." "Yet here you are," Lady Rowena murmured. The Duke rose. Every gentleman followed. Lady Cecily. "Sir Alastair. You arrive at an unusual hour." Cecily's lashes lowered. Concern rarely consults clocks. "How fortunate Concern found a carriage road in the dark," the Duke replied. Sir Alastair smiled. "The roads are improved enough for those determined to be useful." The Duke looked to Halcombe. 2 additional places. Beatrice's stomach tightened. It was one thing to face strangers. It was another to face the people who knew precisely where to press because they had helped build the bruise. Cecily was seated opposite her, close enough to observe the ribbon at her waist. Sir Alastair was placed near Sir Edmund, which kept him far from Beatrice and visibly under the Duke's eye. If he noticed the strategy, he chose not to show it. "My dear Beatrice," Cecily said once the servants had restored the order of the table, "we were so frightened. Papa has not slept." Beatrice met her gaze. "Then I am sorry he is tired." Mrs. Darby coughed into her napkin. Cecily's smile tightened. "You speak lightly, but you cannot understand what your absence has done to Valehurst. The servants are whispering. Neighbours will ask questions. Papa's heart is most tender where family is concerned." "Lord Percival has hidden that tenderness with remarkable discipline," Lady Rowena said. Cecily turned pink, but only delicately. "I know this situation must look strange. My cousin is not always herself when agitated." There it was. Soft, sorrowful, poisonous. Beatrice felt the words move around the table like a draft seeking a crack. She could have defended herself too quickly and seemed frantic. She could have stayed silent and allowed Cecily to name her condition for her. Instead, she reached for her water glass and took one measured sip. "I have heard that phrase often in the last day," she said. "Not myself. Overwrought. Unsettled. I begin to wonder why a woman's composure is only trusted when she agrees to be controlled." Lord Wexford looked up fully now. Sir Edmund's gaze sharpened. Mrs. Darby stopped pretending to eat. Cecily's eyes cooled. "That is unfair." "No," Beatrice said. "It is merely inconvenient." Sir Alastair leaned back. "You must forgive Lady Beatrice. She has been under strain." The Duke's voice came from the head of the table. "Sir Alastair, if you continue to translate Lady Beatrice's thoughts after she has spoken them herself, I will consider the repetition unnecessary." The room went still. The rebuke was perfectly civil. It left no place to hide. Sir Alastair bowed his head. "As your Grace wishes." Mrs. Darby looked from the Duke to Beatrice with the expression of a woman storing each detail for later deployment. Cecily changed tactics. "I only hope my cousin has not been made anxious by old papers. Papa mentioned that some private family letter may have been misunderstood." Beatrice's fingers touched the blue ribbon at her waist before she could stop them. Cecily saw it. Her face altered for less than a second. So little, no one else might have noticed. But Beatrice noticed. The Duke noticed Cecily noticing. That knowledge passed between them across the candles without a word. "What sort of family letter?" Mrs. Darby asked pleasantly. Cecily recovered. "Nothing of consequence. My Aunt Lady Helen had a tender imagination, and illness gave weight to many fancies." "Lady Helen was a gentlewoman of excellent reputation," Lord Wexford said. "I recall my mother speaking well of her." "How kind," Cecily replied, though her tone had lost its ease. "Still, grief alters memory." Beatrice heard her mother's dignity being folded into weakness, just as Percival and Alastair had tried to fold Beatrice into instability. A quiet anger rose in her, clean and steady. My mother was not a fancy, she said. Nor was her hand so light that others may erase it. Lady Rowena's eyes warmed with approval. The Duke remained still, but his attention held Beatrice like a lamp in a dark hall. Cecily smiled again, too quickly. Of course not. I only meant that letters can be misread, especially by those who want comfort. Or by those who fear evidence, Beatrice said. The last word struck the table harder than she intended. Sir Alistair's hand tightened on his glass. Mrs. Darby saw that too. Then Cecily leaned forward and dropped her voice just enough to make everyone listen harder. Dear cousin, no one wishes to shame you. Come home tomorrow. Papa will forgive the embarrassment. Sir Alistair will be generous. This can all be explained as a nervous mistake. There was the offer. A cage, polished and lined with forgiveness. Beatrice looked at Sir Alistair, then at Cecily, then at every witness seated under the Duke's roof. Her heartbeat was loud in her ears, but her voice did not shake. I did not mistake my way in the storm. I chose the only door where no one had the right to command me. Silence fell. It was not empty this time. It was listening. The Duke rose. Then let it be understood by everyone present that Lady Beatrice Vale remains here as the properly attended guest of this house until she chooses otherwise. He turned to Mrs. Darby. Madam, I trust that is clear enough for the county. Mrs. Darby folded her hands. Perfectly, Your Grace. Cecily's colour faded. Sir Alistair gave a small laugh, but it had no life in it. You are taking a great risk for an old enemy's daughter. The Duke looked at Beatrice, not long enough to compromise, but long enough to be seen. I am taking a greater risk by ignoring what others are so anxious to hide. Beatrice felt the reversal ripple through the room. She had entered dinner as a rumour waiting to be judged. She sat now as a woman whose silence had begun to trouble the guilty. When the ladies withdrew after the final course, Cecily brushed close enough for only Beatrice to hear. You should have let the rain take the letter. Beatrice did not turn. She did not flinch. Then you should not have feared it so much. The scandal reached Win-thorpe Hall before breakfast, folded into a London sheet that smelled of cheap ink and deliberate cruelty. Howcombe brought it in on a silver salver, as if silver could make the words less vulgar, and placed it beside the Duke's untouched coffee. Lady Beatrice knew before anyone read aloud that the world had found a way to make shelter sound like sin. The Duke unfolded the page. His face did not move. That frightened her more than anger would have done. Lady Rowena, seated beside the fire with her correspondence, looked over the rim of her spectacles. How bad? The Duke's hand tightened once, then stilled. Inventive. Beatrice rose from the small writing desk where she had been trying to copy the legible portions of her mother's letter. Please read it. No, the answer came too quickly. He looked up, and something guarded crossed his face. There is no necessity. There is every necessity if it concerns me. Lady Rowena set down her pen. The Duke was silent for one beat too long, then passed the sheet across the table. Beatrice took it with steady fingers. Lady Beatrice Vale, long pitied as the dependent ornament of Valehurst, has found bold refuge under the roof of the very nobleman her family once condemned. Whether storm, strategy, or sentiment carried her to Harrowmere land, society may soon decide. Some ladies are rescued. Others arrange to be discovered. The words were not loud. They did not need to be. They entered the room and made every candle, every chair, every polished surface seem like a witness. Beatrice read the paragraph twice because humiliation had a way of becoming less real if one forced the eyes to behave. It did not. Her name had become entertainment. Her fear had become flirtation. Her flight from coercion had become calculation. There is more, the Duke said quietly. She lowered the page. Does it matter? Yes. His voice had sharpened with pain he had not meant to show. Because this is not a local whisper now. It has reached London. Lady Rowena took the sheet and read the rest, her mouth thinning. A truly contemptible little article. It implies without stating, accuses without evidence, and leaves enough blank space for every bored woman in Mayfair to fill with poison. Howcombe appeared again before the silence had settled, this time with letters. 3 invitations returned unopened. One note from a neighbour regretted that Mrs. Darby could not call as planned. Another from Sir Edmund Fallow expressed hope that His Grace would understand the strain placed upon county households by uncertain associations. Beatrice listened to each phrase with the stillness of someone learning how swiftly a door could close without making a sound. By the fourth letter, Lady Rowena said, "Enough." The Duke had not sat down. He stood near the window, one shoulder turned toward the pale morning, the scandal sheet crushed lightly in his hand. This was Morden. "And Cecily," Beatrice said. "He has the vanity. She has the needle." Lady Rowena's gaze flickered toward her with approval. "That is a useful distinction." Beatrice tried to smile. It failed. Across the room, on the desk, lay her mother's damaged letter, weighted beneath a paper knife. The line they had uncovered the previous evening seemed to burn through the folded paper. Percival altered the account before Harrowmere signed nothing. Not before Harrowmere signed. Before Harrowmere signed nothing. A denial hidden inside damaged ink. A dead woman's voice trying to speak through rain and time. The Duke turned from the window. "You cannot remain exposed here." Beatrice looked at him carefully. "Exposed? Every hour under my roof gives them more material. Every hour outside it gives them more access. Lady Rowena can take you to Bath. Her house there is respectable, removed from the county, and beyond Lord Percival's immediate reach. I will continue the inquiry through Mr. Calder." The words were orderly. Sensible. Cold in the way decisions became cold when men believed feeling would weaken them. Beatrice felt the floor change beneath her. "You mean to send me away?" "I mean to protect you. From scandal. From being consumed by it." "And who decides the difference?" The Duke's eyes met hers. "This is not a punishment. It feels very much like removal." Lady Rowena shifted but did not interrupt. Beatrice understood why. This was not a quarrel about travel. It was a test of the very thing the Duke had offered her at the door. Shelter or control? Protection or concealment? She folded her hands before her so he would not see them tremble. "When I arrived here, I was told I could choose whether to remain. Circumstances have changed." "No. They have become public." He flinched slightly. Only slightly. Public cruelty is rarely improved by standing still beneath it. Nor by being hidden because others have called me shameful. His face hardened, not against her, perhaps against the truth in what she said. "You underestimate the appetite of society. I was raised inside it." "I do not." "Then you know what they will call you." "They are already calling me those things." The room went quiet. The Duke looked at the scandal sheet in his hand, then at the invitations lying like little corpses on the salver. "Bath will give you distance." "Distance from what?" "My mother's letter? My uncle's lies? Your father's name? Or the inconvenience of having a Vale under your roof while London laughs?" The question struck harder than she intended. Lady Rowena drew in a breath. The Duke went very still. For a moment, Beatrice saw the man behind the title, not cold, not unfeeling, but wounded in a place pride had covered so long that even kindness touched it roughly. He spoke at last. "You believe I am ashamed of your presence. I believe you are afraid of what it will cost to be seen beside me." His jaw tightened. "That is unfair." "Perhaps." Her voice softened, but she did not retreat. "But so is being protected out of sight." He turned away. That was the first time he had done so from her words. The gesture was small. It hurt more than she expected. Lady Rowena rose then, slow and composed. "Adrian, may I speak plainly?" "You generally do." "Then hear this. Sending her away may save appearances, but it will teach every gossip in England that the rumour frightened you into distance. It will teach Lord Percival that pressure works. And keeping her here will cost something." Lady Rowena looked at Beatrice. "Truth usually does." The Duke said nothing. A log shifted in the grate. Outside, carriage wheels sounded faintly on the wet road, then passed. Beatrice waited, hoping he would choose with her instead of for her. Hoping had become dangerous. The Duke finally faced her again, and the decision had settled over him like armor. Lady Rowena will accompany you to Bath tomorrow morning. Mr. Calder will follow within 2 days with copies of what we have. You will be safer there. Beatrice felt the words enter and find old wounds. Not because he meant to harm her. Because intention did not erase result. I see. Lady Beatrice. No, Your Grace. The title came out more formal than she had used since the night of the storm. His eyes changed at the distance in it. I understand perfectly. You opened the door when I had nowhere else to stand. Now the house has become less convenient than the gesture. That is not what this is. Then what is it? He had no answer swift enough to save the moment. Beatrice took the scandal sheet from the table and folded it once, neatly, because a woman could still be orderly while being publicly ruined. I will travel with Lady Rowena in the morning. But do not mistake my agreement for trust. The words landed between them with terrible quiet. Lady Rowena closed her eyes for an instant. The Duke looked as though she had placed the sheet not on the table, but into his hand with the edge sharpened. Beatrice moved to the writing desk and gathered her mother's letter. The paper trembled once in her fingers. She steadied it. May I keep this with me? She asked. The Duke's voice was low. It is yours. Yes, she said. I am beginning to remember that. She left the breakfast room before the ache in her throat could become visible. In the corridor, Mrs. Wren waited with eyes too kind for Beatrice's composure. My lady, there is another note. Beatrice stopped. From whom? It was left by a boy from the village. No crest. The note was folded badly, sealed with common wax, and addressed in a cramped hand. Beatrice opened it beneath the shadow of the staircase. If you value what your mother hid, ask for Fenwick before they lock Valehurst against you. He was steward when the accounts changed. Do not let Morden search your things. Beatrice read the message once. Then again. The air around her seemed to narrow. Behind her, through the closed breakfast room door, she could hear the Duke's voice, controlled and distant, giving orders that would send her away. Ahead lay Bath, safety, silence, and the slow suffocation of waiting while men decided which truths could be handled. She folded the note and placed it inside her glove. For the first time since the storm, her fear did not ask to be soothed. It asked to be used. That evening, as Mrs. Wren packed the borrowed gowns and Lady Rowena arranged the route, Beatrice stood alone at the window overlooking the dark drive. Somewhere beyond those trees was Valehurst. Somewhere within its walls, perhaps, was a record her uncle feared more than scandal. The Duke had chosen distance. Perhaps he thought it mercy. Perhaps he had not yet learned that a woman could be hidden and harmed by the same hand. Beatrice touched the glove where the note lay concealed and made a decision no one had given her permission to make. She would leave Win-thorpe in the morning. But she would not go meekly to Bath. Lady Beatrice Vale left Win-thorpe Hall at 9 in the morning with her mother's letter hidden where Sir Alistair Morden would never think to look, and with the terrible knowledge that safety could become another name for silence if she allowed frightened men to define it. The travelling carriage stood before the steps beneath a sky washed pale after storm, its wheels newly cleaned, its lamps polished, its horses stamping in the damp air. Lady Rowena March waited inside with a rug over her knees and a face arranged into perfect indifference. The Duke of Harrowmere stood at the foot of the steps, gloved, grave, and distant in the way he had chosen to become since deciding she must be sent away. He had not slept. Beatrice could see it in the faint shadow beneath his eyes, though he wore command as cleanly as other men wore linen. The roads toward Bath should be passable by afternoon, he said. Lady Rowena has instructions for the stops. Mr. Calder will follow with copies of the letter once they are complete. Beatrice held her reticule lightly, almost carelessly, because it no longer contained the thing everyone wanted. Before dawn, she had folded the rain-damaged letter into a linen handkerchief and placed it beneath the false bottom of a small glove box Mrs. Wren had lent her. In the reticule lay only a prayer book, a handkerchief, and one sheet of blank paper. She had learned something useful at Valehurst. Men who believed women helpless rarely searched intelligently. That is very thorough, Your Grace, she said. The formal address made his gaze sharpen. Lady Beatrice. I am grateful for your arrangements. Do not make gratitude sound like farewell. Is that not what you arranged? The words were quiet. Lady Rowena looked out through the carriage window and became deeply interested in the wet gravel. The Duke took one step closer, then stopped because several servants stood within hearing. I arranged distance from immediate harm. And I am arranging not to mistake distance for deliverance. His jaw tightened. For one moment, she thought he would say what he had not been able to say the previous day. That he had been wrong. That fear had made him choose the appearance of protection rather than the substance. He only bowed. Then I hope your journey proves less painful than its cause. Beatrice curtsied, because dignity was sometimes the only rebellion allowed in public. Good morning, Your Grace. She entered the carriage and did not look back until the wheels had carried them down the drive. When she did, the Duke still stood where she had left him, a dark figure before the grey stone of his house, watching as if the road had taken more than a guest from him. Lady Rowena waited until Win-thorpe vanished behind the trees before speaking. You are not going to Bath. Beatrice turned. No, I suspected as much when you asked Mrs. Wren for the old glove box and looked guilty enough to be honest. Despite herself, Beatrice almost smiled. There is a retired steward named Fenwick. He may know where the account book was kept. And you intended to tell me when? Before we reached the road where I would need your help. Lady Rowena tapped one finger against the top of her cane. That is not a confession designed to flatter your chaperone. No. It is the truth. The older lady studied her for a long moment. Good. I am too old to be managed and too vain to be useless. Where is Fenwick? I do not know exactly. The note said to ask for him before Valehurst is locked against us. Then we begin with an inn. Stablemen know old stewards better than ladies do. The carriage turned not toward the southern road, but toward the market village of Belford, 6 miles from Valehurst and near the old estate boundary. With every mile, Beatrice felt the strange terror of choosing her own danger. She had been afraid at Win-thorpe, but there the Duke's walls had held the world back. Here, each hedgerow seemed capable of producing Percival's judgment, Cecily's smile, or Sir Alistair's polished concern. Yet beneath the fear ran something steadier. She was moving because she had chosen to move. At Belford, the coaching inn yard was alive with wet straw, harness bells, and men calling for fresh horses. Lady Rowena sent her maid to inquire discreetly after Mr. Fenwick while Beatrice waited in the private parlour, where the fire smoked and the wallpaper had faded to the colour of old tea. The glove box sat beside her on the settle. Her reticule lay deliberately in her lap. 15 minutes passed. Then the door opened without a knock. Sir Alistair Morden entered as though he had been expected. Behind him came Lady Cecily Vale, her bonnet ribbons tied with infuriating neatness. There you are, Sir Alistair said, smiling. I'm relieved we caught you before Bath. Beatrice stood. Lady Rowena rose more slowly. Sir Alistair, she said, you have a gift for arriving where you have not been invited. Cecily sighed. Please do not make this ugly. We are trying to prevent ugliness. How industrious of you, Lady Rowena replied. Sir Alistair's gaze moved around the room, measuring exits, witnesses, the glove box, the reticule. Lady Beatrice, Lord Percival has instructed me to escort you home. Matters have gone too far. Lord Percival's instructions do not govern me. They govern your settlement, your allowance, and the roof you abandoned. Then he governs furniture and accounts. Not my consent. Cecily's face hardened beneath its sweetness. Beatrice, don't be foolish. People are already laughing. You cannot outrun the story. No, Beatrice said. But I can refuse to live inside yours. Sir Alistair stepped closer and lowered his voice, though Lady Rowena was still near enough to hear every word. You are making a spectacle of yourself. Harrowmere sent you away. Does that not tell you enough? It struck. He meant it to. Beatrice felt the pain open, but she did not offer him the satisfaction of seeing how cleanly he had found the wound. It tells me the Duke can be wrong, she said. It does not make you right. His smile vanished. Where is the letter? Safe. That paper belongs to your uncle. You repeat that often for a man who has no right to it. He reached for the reticule before she could move. Lady Rowena snapped, "Sir." The action was not rough, but it was deliberate enough to make the room freeze. Sir Alistair opened the reticule, removed the prayer book and handkerchief, then found nothing else. The blank paper fluttered to the floor. His expression changed before he mastered it. Cecily saw. Beatrice saw Cecily see. "Looking for something?" Beatrice asked. Sir Alistair closed the reticule and placed it on the table as if he had merely inspected a dropped glove. "I am looking for evidence of your good sense." Beatrice turned to the innkeeper, who had appeared in the doorway with Lady Rowena's maid behind him, both alarmed into silence. "Mr. Hobbs, is it?" "Yes, my lady." "Please be so good as to remember who is present in this room." "Lady Rowena March, Lady Cecily Vale, Sir Alistair Morden, your maidservant, and yourself. Please also remember that Sir Alistair took my reticule from my person without permission and searched it." Sir Alistair flushed. "That is absurd." "It is accurate," Lady Rowena said. "And I will add my name to any account of it." The innkeeper looked from one rank to another, visibly wishing to become part of the wallpaper. "Yes, my lady." Cecily stepped forward. "Beatrice, you are embarrassing yourself." "No," Beatrice said. "For once, I am making embarrassment useful." Outside, a horse arrived hard in the yard. Hooves struck wet stone. Voices rose. Sir Alistair turned toward the window, and the first real uncertainty crossed his face. The parlour door opened moments later, and the Duke of Harrowmere stood there with rain on his greatcoat and anger held so tightly it had become quiet. His gaze went first to Beatrice, then to the reticule on the table, then to Sir Alistair. "I received Lady Rowena's note," he said. Beatrice looked at the older woman. Lady Rowena did not look sorry. "I wrote before breakfast," she said. A chaperone may be old, but she need not be slow. The Duke entered the room. "Lady Beatrice, are you unharmed?" "Yes." "Did Sir Alistair touch you?" "No." "He searched my reticule." The Duke's face changed by degrees, and each degree made Sir Alistair seem smaller. Then he has confused concern with entitlement. Sir Alistair lifted his chin. "I acted for Lord Percival. That defence grows poorer with use." The Duke looked back at Beatrice, and the anger in him altered into something more difficult. "Regret. I sent you into this." "Yes," she said. The word hurt him. She saw it. She did not soften it. "I thought distance would protect you. It gave them a road on which to intercept me." "I know." Silence settled. Not the dead silence of shame, but the living kind that asks what someone will do next. Beatrice lifted the glove box from the settle and held it close. "You may stand with me, Your Grace. But you may not decide for me again." The Duke bowed his head, not to rank, not to society, but to the truth she had placed before him. "I won't." Cecily stared as if the world had become indecent. Sir Alistair looked toward the door, but the innkeeper still stood there, a witness now whether he liked it or not. Beatrice drew the folded note from her glove and held it out. "Mr. Fenwick knows where the accounts changed. I intend to find him." The Duke took the note only after she released it. His eyes moved across the cramped hand. "Then we find him together." "With Lady Rowena," Beatrice said. "With Lady Rowena," he agreed. Lady Rowena gathered her gloves. "Excellent. I dislike bath in wet weather." Beatrice almost laughed, but the sound caught in her throat and became something steadier than relief. She was not rescued. Not exactly. She had held the room until help arrived, and that made all the difference. As the Duke offered his arm to Lady Rowena and ordered fresh horses without once commanding Beatrice's path, she looked at Sir Alistair and Cecily, both trapped in the gaze of witnesses they had not planned for. "Tell Lord Percival," she said, "that I am done being returned." Then she picked up the glove box, walked past them, and stepped into the yard by choice. Mr. Fenwick lived 3 miles beyond Belford in a cottage so small and grey that it seemed less built beside the lane than left there by weather. Ivy crowded the stones, smoke drifted thinly from the chimney, and the little garden had been cut back with the severity of a man who no longer trusted beauty not to be noticed. By the time the Duke's carriage stopped before the gate, Afternoon had gathered low over the fields, and the road behind them lay empty except for the coachman, one outrider, and the steady presence of Lady Rowena, who had refused to be left at the inn with the same calm finality with which she refused bad tea. Mr. Calder, the Duke's solicitor, had joined them halfway there in a hired chaise, bringing a leather case, spectacles, and the expression of a man who had spent his life learning that truth often arrived in damaged handwriting. Beatrice stepped down with a glove box held close. She had expected the cottage to frighten her less than Valehurst or Win-thorpe Hall. Instead, its quiet unnerved her. Great houses announced their secrets with locked doors and family portraits. This place hid its fear in trimmed hedges and curtains drawn before sunset. The Duke offered his hand to steady her from the carriage, then stopped himself before she could decide whether to accept. The pause was so brief no one else might have seen it. She did. He remembered what she had said at the inn. He would stand with her, not decide for her. Beatrice placed her own foot on the wet ground and gave him the smallest nod. "Thank you," she said. "For stopping?" he asked quietly. "For remembering." His face changed, not enough to soften, but enough to let regret through. "I intend to do more than remember." Lady Rowena tapped the gate with her cane. "Admirable. Begin by opening that. Mud respects no one's emotional development." Beatrice almost smiled, and the fragile ease carried her to the cottage door. Mr. Fenwick did not answer the first knock. At the second, the curtain moved. At the third, a thin elderly man opened the door only wide enough to show one eye, a lined cheek, and a hand gripping the wood as if visitors were whether he might shut out. "I buy nothing," he said. "We are not selling anything," Lady Rowena replied. "Then I have nothing to give." Beatrice stepped forward before the Duke could speak. "Mr. Fenwick, my name is Lady Beatrice Vale." The door began to close. "No, please." The word left her with more urgency than pride, but not weakness. She lifted the glove box. "My mother was Lady Helen Vale." The door stopped. Something moved in the old man's face, not welcome, not quite grief, but the shock of a name thought safely buried. "Lady Helen is dead." "Yes." Beatrice's voice thinned, then steadied. "But she left me a letter." "Mr." Fenwick looked past her to the Duke. His eye sharpened with fear. "And you bring Harrowmere to my door?" The Duke removed his hat. "I came because your name was given to Lady Beatrice, not because I intend to command your speech." Dukes always command, whether they intend to or not. "Then answer her, not me." The old man stared at him for a long moment. Then his gaze returned to Beatrice. "If you are your mother's daughter, you had better come in before someone sees you standing there." The cottage was warm, low-ceilinged, and crowded with objects kept long past their use, ledgers without pages, cracked cups, a clock that did not run, a walking stick polished by years of habit. Mr. Fenwick allowed Lady Rowena the only cushioned chair, gestured Beatrice toward a stool, and ignored the Duke until Mr. Calder introduced himself. "A solicitor," Fenwick muttered. "There is the smell of trouble at last." "There was trouble before I arrived," Mr. Calder said mildly. "I am only the clerk invited to take its measurements." That earned a reluctant glance of approval. Beatrice opened the glove box and withdrew the linen-wrapped letter. She did not hand it to the Duke. She did not hand it to Mr. Calder. She placed it on the table before Mr. Fenwick. The old man looked at the faded blue wax and sat down as if his knees had remembered his age all at once. "She kept it," he whispered. "You recognize the seal?" Beatrice asked. "I recognize the sin around it." Lady Rowena leaned forward. "Speak plainly, Mr. Fenwick. We are all too old for ornamental dread." He gave a dry, humorless laugh. Lady Helen said much the same once, though kinder. His fingers hovered over the letter but did not touch it. "I was steward at Valehurst when the accounts changed. Lord Percival was not master then, not fully, but he had the handling of papers because your father trusted family more than arithmetic." Beatrice drew a slow breath. Her father had become, in family memory, a vague gentle shadow who had died before he could protect anyone. To hear he had trusted the wrong person gave that shadow a wound. "What accounts?" she asked. Fenwick looked at the Duke. "A subscription fund first. Relief for tenants and mill families after a bad season. Lord Harrowmere pledged oversight, not debt. He refused to sign a private note afterward because the terms had been altered. A week later, a note appeared with his hand on it, accepting obligation for funds he never took. The Duke did not move. Only his eyes changed. My father denied it until his death. He told the truth. Silence settled into the low room. It was heavier than any shout. Beatrice watched the Duke absorb the words he had waited years to hear and feared to believe. No triumph came into his face. Only sorrow, controlled with terrible discipline. Why did no one say this? He asked. Fenwick's mouth tightened. Some tried. Papers vanished. Servants were dismissed. Your mother, Lady Beatrice, saw the account book before Percival locked it away. She wrote a copy of what she could remember. She meant to send it to Harrowmere. Why did she not? Beatrice asked, though part of her already knew. Fenwick looked at her with pity she did not want but could not resent. Lord Percival told her that if she stirred the matter, your father's name would be dragged through court and gossip. He said Harrowmere would crush the Vales to save itself. He said a woman with a child should think first of the child's bread. She was young enough to be frightened, and wise enough to know men can ruin truth by making it expensive. Beatrice felt the words enter the place where she had kept a simpler grief. Her mother had not been weak. She had been cornered. The knowledge hurt, then healed something she had not known was broken. She carried it alone, Beatrice said. No, Fenwick replied. She carried it as long as she could. Then she left it to you. The Duke turned toward her, and the look in his eyes was almost unbearable. Not pity. Respect edged with remorse. Lady Beatrice, he said softly, I am sorry. She knew he apologized for more than the letter. For believing distance could save her? For old hatred accepted too easily? For a father's suffering that had made him see a family instead of a woman? So am I, she said. But I would rather have sorrow with truth than peace with a locked door. Mr. Calder cleared his throat gently. Mr. Fenwick, does any record remain beyond Lady Helen's letter? The old man's gaze slid to the hearth. There was a second ledger. Everyone in the room stilled. Where? The Duke asked. Fenwick did not answer him. He looked at Beatrice. At Valehurst, unless Percival found it. Your mother persuaded me to hide a key before I was dismissed. Not the ledger itself. I dared not take it. But a key to the old estate's strong box where copies were sometimes placed when the master travelled. He rose with effort, went to the clock that did not run, and opened the back panel. From within, wrapped in a strip of worn blue ribbon, he took a small iron key. Beatrice stood slowly. The ribbon was faded, but she knew the colour. Her mother had kept one like it in her prayer book. She gave you that? She said if her daughter ever came asking, I was to know silence had failed. He placed the key in Beatrice's palm. It was cold and heavier than it looked. The strongbox is in the West Records room at Valehurst. Behind the map cabinet, if they have not moved it. Lady Rowena looked toward the window. And Lord Percival will be expecting Lady Beatrice to go meekly to Bath, not return to Valehurst. He will not expect her to walk in with a solicitor, Mr. Calder said. The Duke's instinctive response was visible before he spoke. It is too dangerous for you to go back. Beatrice looked at him. He stopped. The room waited. Slowly, with an effort that seemed to cost him more than command ever had, he changed the sentence. I fear it will be dangerous. But the decision is yours. Lady Rowena's eye softened with approval. Beatrice closed her fingers around the key. Then I choose to go. The Duke bowed his head once. Then I will stand at the boundary unless you ask otherwise. It was the answer she had needed before she knew how badly she needed it. Fenwick sank back into his chair, exhausted by truth. Mr. Calder began noting names, dates, and fragments with swift precision. Lady Rowena asked the practical questions, roads, entrances, which servants at Valehurst might still be loyal to memory rather than Percival. When at last they stepped outside, the air smelled of wet earth and wood smoke. Beatrice looked at the key in her hand, wrapped again in the blue ribbon. It no longer felt like a secret. It felt like a door waiting to decide whether she had the courage to open it. The Duke stood beside her, not too near. "You were right," he said. She looked toward him. "About what?" "Protection without choice is only a finer cage." The words moved through her quietly. They did not erase the hurt, but they altered its shape. "Then do not build me another one." "I won't." The carriage waited at the lane, and beyond it the road bent toward Valehurst, toward Percival, toward the room where her mother's truth might still be locked away. Beatrice lifted her skirts clear of the mud and walked toward it with the key hidden safely in her glove. For the first time, the past was not chasing her. She was going back to meet it. Valehurst looked smaller when Lady Beatrice returned to it by choice. That was the first surprise. The house had not changed in the few days since she had fled through its back corridors with rain in the windows and fear in her throat, yet as the carriage rolled up the familiar approach beneath a cold afternoon sky, the old stone no longer seemed like judgment carved into architecture. It was still grand, with its long front, narrow windows, and clipped yews standing like watchmen along the gravel. It still held every room where she had learned to lower her voice and mistake endurance for gratitude. But the road behind her held Lady Rowena March, Mr. Calder, a signed note naming the purpose of their visit, and the small iron key wrapped in her mother's faded blue ribbon. More than that, the road behind her held the Duke of Harrowmere, though not at the door, not beside her like a challenge thrown at Lord Percival's feet. Adrian had stopped his horse at the old boundary marker where Valehurst land began, exactly as she had asked. From the carriage window, Beatrice could see him in the distance, a dark figure under a bare oak, his groom several yards behind him, his posture rigid with the effort of not interfering. Lady Rowena followed her gaze and said, "He looks as if patience is a coat made 3 sizes too small." Beatrice's fingers tightened around the key. "He promised." "Yes." Men of rank often find promises easier before they have to obey them. "He will obey this one." The certainty in her own voice startled her. It was not blind faith. It was something more careful, more earned. She had seen him stop himself at Fenwick's door. She had heard him change command into choice. She had watched him accept that his instinct to protect could wound if it did not leave room for her will. Those were not pretty words spoken beneath candles. They were difficult acts. The carriage stopped before the entrance. Valehurst servants appeared in the doorway, their faces disciplined and pale. Mr. Hobson, the old butler, looked at Beatrice as if he had expected a runaway girl and found instead someone he could not easily name. Beatrice stepped down before the footman could fully lower the step. Lady Rowena descended after her with the dignity of a dowager inspecting a battlefield she had no intention of losing. Mr. Calder followed, carrying his leather case. "Lady Beatrice," Hobson said, bowing. "Lord Percival is in the library." "Then inform him I have come to inspect papers belonging to my late mother's settlement, accompanied by Lady Rowena March and Mr. Calder, solicitor to His Grace the Duke of Harrowmere." Hobson blinked once at the title, then bowed again. "Yes, my lady." The phrase "my lady" had been spoken to her 1,000 times in this house. Today it sounded different. Not warmer. True. Lord Percival did not wait in the library after all. He met them in the great hall, dressed in black as if mourning the inconvenience of her independence. His hair was perfectly ordered, his expression grave, and his hands folded at his back in the posture he used when servants required correction. Lady Cecily stood near the staircase in pale muslin, her face arranged into wounded concern, but her eyes fixed on Beatrice's gloves. Sir Alistair was not present. That absence felt less like mercy than strategy. "Beatrice," Lord Percival said, "you have caused profound distress. Then I am relieved to provide clarity." His mouth tightened. Clarity is rarely achieved by bringing Harrowmere's solicitor into Valehurst. Mr. Calder bowed. "I come as witness and adviser, my lord." "No more. You come where you have no standing." Lady Rowena stepped forward. "He comes with me. I trust my standing does not require embroidery." Lord Percival's expression hardened by a fraction. "Lady Rowena, this is a family matter. Most injustices are, at first." Beatrice felt Cecily's gaze move sharply to the older lady, then back to her. The hall seemed to hold its breath. Footmen stood at the edges pretending not to listen. A maid paused near the stair with folded linen in her arms. Valehurst had always been a house where truth travelled below stairs before it dared appear above. Beatrice drew the key from her glove. "I wish to open the old strongbox in the West Records room." Lord Percival's face changed so little that only someone raised under his roof would have known the change mattered. "For what purpose?" "To see whether my mother's papers remain where they were kept." "Your mother had no papers of consequence." "Then opening an empty box should not trouble you." Cecily drew a breath. "Beatrice, don't do this here." Beatrice looked at her cousin. "Where would you prefer truth to be done? In whispers? In locked rooms? In letters stolen from reticules?" Cecily coloured. Lord Percival's voice dropped. "You are not well." The old words entered the hall with their familiar chill. Beatrice felt them reach for her. This time, they found no place to settle. "No," she said. "I am no longer obedient in the manner you prefer." For a moment, she saw him clearly. Not as the uncle who had controlled the purse, the dining table, the carriage, the invitations, and the story of her mother. As a man afraid of a key in a woman's hand. "The records room," Beatrice said. "Now." It was Lady Rowena who moved first, not Lord Percival. That made refusal difficult. Mr. Calder followed, and after a pause that exposed him more than consent would have done, Percival turned and led them through the passage toward the west wing. Beatrice knew the route. She had passed that door for years without being permitted inside. The West Records room smelled of paper, dust, leather, and old decisions. Tall shelves lined the walls. A map cabinet stood beneath a faded hunting print. Behind it, half hidden in shadow, was a narrow iron strongbox built into the lower paneling. Fenwick had remembered correctly. Beatrice knelt before it. The key trembled once in her hand, not from fear alone, but from the strange intimacy of touching a secret her mother had reached toward and missed. "This is absurd," Lord Percival said. "That box has not been used in years." "Then it has been waiting patiently," Lady Rowena replied. The key turned with a reluctant scrape. The lid opened. The box was empty. Silence struck the room. Cecily, who had followed despite not being invited, gave the faintest exhale. Lord Percival's face became almost gentle. That frightened Beatrice more than anger. "You see," he said. "This is what comes of old grief and unhealthy suggestion. Your mother was a tender woman, but her final years were marked by agitation. I spared you that knowledge because I wished to preserve your memory of her." The words were smooth. They were ready. Beatrice stared into the empty box and felt the floor of courage dip beneath her. For one terrible instant, the old training returned. Perhaps she had imagined strength because others had named her weak. Perhaps silence had been kindness after all. Then Mr. Calder said quietly, "Lady Beatrice." He was looking not into the box, but at its lid. The inner lining had lifted where age had loosened the glue. Beneath the thin leather edge, something pale showed. Beatrice took the small knife Mr. Calder offered and eased the lining free. A folded receipt slipped out, along with a narrow length of blue ribbon pressed flat by years of concealment. The room changed. Beatrice picked up the receipt. The ink was faded but legible. A transfer of funds, dated the same week the Harrowmere scandal had begun. The amount was substantial. The beneficiary line named a dowry account prepared for Lady Cecily Vale. Beatrice looked at her cousin. Cecily had gone white. Lord Percival stepped forward. "That paper is private." Mr. Calder moved first, not aggressively, but enough to place himself as witness between Percival and the receipt. "It is also material." "To nothing." "To timing," Beatrice said. Her voice was quiet. "To motive." Percival's eyes flashed. "You understand nothing of estate management. I understand that my mother hid this where you did not think I would ever look. Your mother hid fantasies. She was fragile, suggestible, and increasingly unsound." Beatrice stood. The blue ribbon lay across her palm. No. She was cornered by men who found it useful to call truth illness. The door behind them opened. Adrian stood on the threshold. He did not enter fully. He looked first at Beatrice, not at Percival, not at the receipt. "Did you ask for me?" She realized then that she had not spoken. Lady Rowena had. The older woman stood with one hand on her cane, her gaze as sharp as cut glass. "I did." The room required another witness, not another commander. Adrian's eyes returned to Beatrice. "Is this your choice?" The question steadied more than any rescue could have done. Beatrice looked at the empty strong-box, the hidden receipt, her mother's ribbon, Lord Percival's controlled fury, and Cecily's frightened silence. "Yes," she said. "And thank you for not taking it from me." Only then did Adrian enter. He did not touch the papers. He did not speak over her. He simply stood where every person in the room could see that she no longer stood alone. Mr. Calder copied the receipt's date, amount, and names with swift precision. Lady Rowena instructed Hobson, who had appeared at the door, to call 2 servants as witnesses to the removal of the paper. Lord Percival objected. Mr. Calder answered each objection calmly. Beatrice said nothing until the receipt and ribbon were placed inside the glove box beside her mother's letter. When they left the records room, the servants in the passage saw her carrying the box herself, with Lady Rowena at one side, Mr. Calder at the other, and the Duke behind her by half a step. Not before her. Not dragging her from danger. Behind her, as if guarding the space she had claimed. At the foot of the stairs, Cecily caught Lord Percival's sleeve. Her whisper was meant for him, but fear made it travel. "If she speaks in London, we lose everything." Beatrice stopped. She did not turn. She let the words settle into the house that had once swallowed her mother's voice. Then she walked out through the front door in full daylight, carrying proof that silence had finally made a mistake. London did not shout its judgments. It sent them ahead in folded notes, withdrawn invitations, and drawing-room silences that widened when a woman crossed the threshold. By the time Lady Beatrice Vale entered Lady Southmere's Mayfair house 3 days after leaving Valehurst, she had learned that a scandal did not require proof to breathe. It required only enough respectable people willing to pretend they were concerned. The meeting had been arranged by Lord Percival under the name of Family Settlement, with Lady Southmere serving as social witness because she was old, titled by marriage, and feared by every mother who wished her daughter received at the right houses. The drawing-room was pale gold and green, graceful enough to disguise cruelty as conversation. A low fire burned behind a carved screen. Tea stood untouched on a side table. Chairs had been placed in a crescent, not quite formal enough for law and not quite casual enough for peace. Beatrice felt the shape of the trap before anyone spoke. Lord Percival stood near the mantel with one hand tucked into his coat, his expression grave with injured patience. Lady Cecily sat beside Lady Southmere, her eyes lowered over embroidery she had not sewn a stitch into. Sir Alastair Mordaunt stood near the window, handsome, composed, and dressed like a man prepared to forgive what he had helped destroy. Lady Rowena March entered beside Beatrice, chin lifted, cane tapping once upon the floor like punctuation. Mr. Calder followed with his leather case. The Duke of Harrowmere came last. He did not hurry into the room or announce his authority. He simply entered, and the balance of every person present adjusted around him. Beatrice felt it, but she did not lean toward it. She carried the glove box herself. Inside lay her mother's rain-damaged letter, the blue ribbon, and the hidden receipt from Valehurst. Those objects had once frightened her because they could ruin everything. Now she understood that the ruin had already happened long ago. The question was who had profited from calling it honor. "Lady Beatrice," Lady Southmere said, extending a hand that did not quite invite warmth. "How trying this must be for you." Beatrice curtsied. "Truth often is, my lady." Lady Southmere blinked, then smiled with sudden interest. "Indeed." Lord Percival sighed. "You see, madam, this is precisely what I feared. My niece has mistaken defiance for clarity. She was never a disobedient girl, but recent influences have encouraged a most unfortunate manner." "If by recent influences you mean witnesses," Lady Rowena said, "then yes, I confess we have become troublesome." Sir Alastair gave a soft laugh. "No one wishes to trouble Lady Beatrice. We wish to restore her peace." "I've noticed," Beatrice said. "Peace is always offered to me after silence has failed." The Duke's gaze moved to her, quick and controlled. She did not look back, but she felt the quiet force of his approval. It steadied her more than a touch could have done. Lord Percival opened a small portfolio on the table. I did not call this meeting to trade clever phrases. A young lady's reputation hangs by a thread, and those who truly care for her must act before the damage becomes permanent. How noble, Lady Rowena murmured. Lady Southmere lifted a finger. Let him speak. I am curious where nobility intends to place the blame. Percival's jaw tightened. He withdrew a folded letter. I have here proof that my niece was not forced toward any marriage. Quite the reverse. She wrote to Sir Alistair Morden herself, expressing attachment, fear of poverty, and a desire to be settled under his protection before her position at Valehurst became precarious. The room chilled. Beatrice stared at the paper. She had expected accusation. She had not expected forgery wearing her own voice. Sir Alistair lowered his eyes as if modesty pained him. I never wished to expose her private feelings. How kind of you to bring them to a room full of people, Lady Rowena said. Beatrice turned to Sir Alistair. You say I wrote that? His voice softened. Beatrice, you were distressed. I don't blame you. Do not use my name as if it belongs more easily in your mouth than in mine. Cecily looked up sharply. Percival placed the letter before Lady Southmere. Madam, you will see the hand is close enough to convince any reasonable observer. Close enough, Beatrice repeated. An interesting phrase for truth. Lady Southmere lifted the letter and studied it. The hand is feminine. So is half the correspondence in England, Lady Rowena replied. The Duke had not moved. His stillness no longer frightened Beatrice. It warmed the room. Lady Southmere passed the letter toward Beatrice. Would you care to deny it? Beatrice took the page. Her first impulse was to reject it at once, but anger, she had learned, was most useful when taught to sit upright. She looked at the date. The ink. The fold. The signature at the bottom. Lady Beatrice Vale. The letters imitated her hand, but the rhythm was wrong. The capital B was too round. The final E in Beatrice curled in a way hers never had. Then she saw it. The word Harrowmere was written Harrowmere, with an unnecessary break, exactly as she had seen in another copied note Mr. Calder had shown her that morning. Her pulse steadied. This is not mine. Percival's expression saddened. A denial was expected. Then you should also have expected scrutiny. Beatrice placed the paper on the table. The date is the 10th. On the 10th, Sir Alistair was not in Yorkshire. He had written from York the day before, and his note did not reach Valehurst until the 11th. If I had been begging him to secure me, I chose an inefficient method. Lady Southmere leaned forward. Go on. The ink is fresher than the fold. The crease has been pressed to appear older. The word Harrowmere is misspelled in the same manner as another paper connected to the old accusation against the late Duke. The Duke's eyes sharpened. May I see it? Beatrice looked at him. It was not hesitation. It was choice. Then she passed him the letter. He read only 3 lines before his face changed. Not with surprise. With recognition so cold that Sir Alistair stepped away from the window. This spelling, Adrian said. I have seen it before. Percival's voice hardened. In old papers no one here has authenticated. Mr. Calder opened his case. Not yet, my lord. That is why we brought witnesses. Sir Alistair gave a short, strained laugh. This is becoming absurd. Lady Beatrice has spent days under Harrowmere influence. Now she questions every document that displeases her. I am willing to overlook the embarrassment, but there must be an end. He turned toward Beatrice with a practiced mixture of sorrow and generosity. Marry me, and I will say publicly that you were confused, frightened, and blameless. I won't speak of the storm. I won't speak of Win-thorpe. I will give you back respectability. The insult was so complete that for a moment no one breathed. He offered a cage and called it mercy. He offered to erase the injury by making her belong to one of its authors. Beatrice looked at him, and something inside her became very quiet. You cannot give me back what you helped steal. Cecily rose. Beatrice, don't be cruel. Sir Alistair is trying to save you. No, Beatrice said. He is trying to purchase my silence with the appearance of forgiveness. Percival struck his cane once against the carpet. Not hard enough to be violent. Hard enough to remind the room that he was accustomed to being obeyed. This display has gone far enough. The Duke stepped forward at last. No one in this room will press Lady Beatrice to accept a marriage while her name is being used as a weapon. You have no authority over my niece, Percival said. Nor do you, Adrian replied. Not in this room. Not over her person. Not over her consent. The words landed with the force of rank and something stronger than rank. Lady Southmere's gaze shifted from Percival to Beatrice, then to the glove box in Beatrice's hands. I understand there is another letter. The room tightened around the question. Cecily's face lost colour. Percival's eyes moved, just once, to the box. Sir Alistair's hand closed over the back of a chair. They were small motions. Guilty motions. Beatrice saw them because she had spent her life studying rooms where power hid behind manners. Yes, she said. From my mother. Percival's voice lowered. Lady Helen was ill. Beatrice met his gaze. No. She was inconvenient. Lady Southmere made a soft sound, not disapproval. Interest. Beatrice placed the glove box on the table and opened it. She removed the blue ribbon first, then the receipt, then the rain-soaked letter whose faded wax had blurred but not vanished. The paper looked fragile against the polished wood. Yet every lie in the room seemed suddenly more fragile than it. My mother's hand was dismissed as weakness, Beatrice said. Her warning was hidden under grief. Her memory has been used to call me unstable whenever I came too near the truth. She looked at Lady Southmere, then Lord Percival, then the Duke, and finally at Sir Alistair. If this room is to judge a woman's word, then let it begin with the woman who was silenced first. A knock sounded before anyone could answer. Halcombe opened the drawing-room door from the hall, and Mr. Fenwick stood behind him, hat in hand, pale from travel but upright. Percival went utterly still. Beatrice laid her palm beside the old letter, not over it. Now, she said, let us read what my mother died protecting. The drawing-room did not move when Mr. Fenwick entered. It held itself still in the way rooms do when every person inside understands that politeness has reached the edge of a cliff. The old steward stood just beyond the threshold with his hat clutched in both hands, his coat brushed carefully but worn at the cuffs, his face pale from travel and from the greater exhaustion of bringing memory into the presence of those who had profited by its burial. Lady Southmere looked from him to Lord Percival. You know this man? Percival's answer came too smoothly. A former servant dismissed many years ago for unreliability. Mr. Fenwick bowed his head once. I was dismissed, my lady. Not for unreliability. For remembering. The word struck harder because he did not raise his voice. Beatrice felt the glove box beneath her fingertips and the damaged letter lying open on the table. The blue wax had softened at the edges until it looked less like a seal than a bruise. Yet it had survived rain, silence, and fear. She would not let it fail now. Lady Southmere gestured to the chair near the hearth. Sit, Mr. Fenwick. If old age has carried you here, we may at least allow it a seat. Thank you, my lady, but I would rather stand. He looked at Beatrice. Her ladyship's mother stood when she spoke to me. I will do the same. Cecily made a faint sound, whether discomfort or irritation Beatrice could not tell. Sir Alistair shifted near the window. Lord Percival's face had become very quiet. Adrian stood a few steps behind Beatrice, close enough that she could feel his presence, far enough that no one could say he directed her hand. That distance, chosen and kept, steadied her. Mr. Calder unfolded a clean sheet. Lady Beatrice, would you like me to read the legible portions? Beatrice looked down at her mother's handwriting. The first time she had read it, the words had broken her breath. Now she wanted them to fill the room that had been prepared to judge her. No, she said. I will read what I can. Lady Rowena's eyes warmed. Lady Southmere leaned back. Percival's hand tightened on his cane. Beatrice lifted the paper. My dearest Beatrice, if you are reading this, then I have failed to protect you by silence. I had hoped never to place the burden of old sins in your hands, but there are debts that are not debts, and accusations that were born from forgery. She paused. The word seemed to pass through Adrian like something long frozen meeting flame. She continued. I saw the account book before Percival locked it away. The entry was altered after Lord Harrowmere refused the private note. The signature shown to your father was not the Duke's hand. Mr. Fenwick saw the earlier page. I copied what I could. If the blue record remains, it will prove that Harrowmere owed nothing, and that the money was moved for a settlement never meant to bear its true name. Lady Southmere's gaze turned to Percival. The settlement. Mr. Calder placed the receipt from Valehurst beside the letter. This was found concealed in the old strong-box lining at Valehurst, witnessed by Lady Rowena, myself, and household servants. The date corresponds to the week the accusation against the late Duke of Harrowmere was first circulated. The funds were directed to a dowry account connected to Lady Cecily Vale. Cecily's embroidery slipped to the carpet. I was a child. You were, Lady Rowena said. Which makes it curious that you now know exactly where to be frightened. Cecily's eyes filled, but the tears had no innocence in them. Papa said it was necessary. He said Harrowmere would destroy us if we did not strike first. Adrian spoke then, low and controlled. My father died defending his name against a lie he could not reach. Lord Percival lifted his chin. Your father was careless with accounts and proud enough to deny obligation once it became inconvenient. Mr. Fenwick stepped forward. No, my lord. The first account was in my hand. Lord Harrowmere pledged oversight of the relief fund, not payment of a private debt. The altered page came after. I saw the scraping where the figure had been changed. A servant's memory, Percival said. Against a gentleman's record. And the gentleman's record misspells Harrowmere in the same manner as the false letter produced today, Beatrice said. She picked up the paper Percival had claimed was hers. Harrowmere, divided where no one in this family writes it so. The old note shown to Mr. Calder bears the same error. Lady Southmere extended her hand. Mr. Calder supplied both papers. She compared them slowly, and while she did, the room seemed to wait upon the movement of her eyes. At last she placed them down. The error is identical. Sir Alistair laughed once, too softly. Errors travel. Clerks copy one another. Adrian turned to him. Did a clerk also instruct you to search Lady Beatrice's reticule at Belford? Sir Alistair flushed. I acted under concern. Concern appears to have paid well. Mr. Calder opened another folded note. Mr. Hobbs of the Belford Inn has provided a written account confirming Sir Alistair searched Lady Beatrice's reticule without permission while Lady Rowena was present. He further states that Sir Alistair asked after a blue-sealed letter. Lady Southmere's face hardened into something far more dangerous than shock. It was social judgment taking form. Sir Alistair, why would a gentleman concerned for a lady's reputation search her belongings for a particular letter? He looked at Cecily. Cecily looked at Percival. Percival looked at no one. Silence answered first. Then Sir Alistair said, Lord Percival believed the paper would distress her. That is not an answer, Lady Southmere said. Sir Alistair's Polish cracked. He promised influence. Introductions. A settlement if I married her and removed the matter from public talk. I did not forge anything. No, Beatrice said quietly. You merely hoped to profit from the silence afterward. He had no reply. Lord Percival moved then, swiftly enough to startle the room but not violently. His hand closed around the edge of Lady Helen's letter and dragged it toward the hearth. This is monstrous. I will not have a dead woman's confusion paraded as evidence. Adrian reached the hearth before the paper touched flame. He caught the letter not from Percival's hand but from the table edge where it had slipped, lifting it clear with a precision that made the attempted destruction look vulgar. He placed it back before Beatrice. You will not burn her mother's voice because it has become inconvenient. Percival's face darkened. You forget yourself. No, Adrian said. For years I remembered only injury. Today I remember justice. He turned, not to Percival, but to Beatrice. Before all those witnesses, the Duke of Harrowmere bowed his head to the woman whose family name he had been raised to hate. Lady Beatrice, I owe you an apology. I allowed an old wrong to make every Vale suspect in my eyes. I mistook inherited bitterness for discernment. When scandal threatened you, I tried to protect you by putting distance between us, and in doing so I repeated the very error men have made around you all your life. I decided too much. I trusted you too little. I am sorry. The room held its breath. Beatrice had imagined many forms of public vindication. She had not imagined this. Not the Duke defending her with rank. Not the Duke defeating Percival with cold authority. The Duke confessing fault before society. It moved something in her more deeply than praise could have done. Thank you, she said. For saying it where others could hear. Lady Southmere rose. The simple act rearranged the room. I have heard enough. Percival stiffened. My lady, surely you cannot intend to accept damaged paper, a dismissed steward, and a young woman's agitation over a gentleman's history. I intend to accept what gentlemen in this room have tried very hard to prevent me from seeing. She looked at Beatrice, and her tone changed. It did not become warm. It became honourable. Lady Beatrice Vale is the daughter of an honourable woman. The words entered Beatrice like sunlight entering a room long shuttered. Lady Rowena closed her eyes for a moment. Mr. Fenwick bowed his head. Cecily began to cry then, truly or strategically, but no one moved to comfort her. Lady Southmere continued. Lord Percival, I will not receive you after today until this matter is answered properly through trustees and council. Lady Cecily, I advise you to retire from London before London retires you. Sir Alistair, you may consider my drawing-room closed to you. Sir Alistair went pale. My lady. Do not make the mistake of believing every scandal can be solved by marrying the woman you helped in danger. Mr. Calder gathered the papers. I will begin the challenge to the trusteeship at once. Percival looked around the room and saw, perhaps for the first time, no one eager to mistake his control for respectability. He bowed stiffly to Lady Southmere and left without taking Cecily's arm. Cecily followed after one desperate look at Beatrice, but Beatrice did not offer rescue from consequences. Sir Alistair remained a second longer, as if charm might still open some door, then found none and departed. When the door closed, the quiet left behind was not empty. It was clean. Beatrice stood with her mother's letter in both hands. She expected triumph. Instead, she felt grief, relief, and a tenderness so sharp she could barely breathe. Adrian came to the table and stopped across from her. He did not touch the letter. This belongs to your mother, he said. And to you. Not to me. Beatrice looked at the faded blue wax, at the ribbon, at the receipt that had turned old shame into proof. It belongs to the truth, she said. Adrian's gaze lifted to hers. In it was no demand, no claim, no hurried romance offered in the heat of vindication. Only a promise held carefully back until she could choose without pressure. Lady Southmere rang for fresh tea, as if society itself required resetting. Lady Rowena gave a small, satisfied sigh. Mr. Fenwick sat at last, suddenly old again now that memory had done its work. Beatrice folded the letter along its worn creases and held it close, not because she feared someone would take it, but because for the first time it felt safe in her hands. 3 weeks after Lady Southmere's drawing-room fell silent around the truth, Lady Beatrice Vale returned to Win-thorpe Hall beneath a sky so clear it seemed almost impertinent. No rain struck the windows. No lanterns pursued her up the drive. No steward called her name as though it were a misplaced possession. The carriage moved at an unhurried pace between the iron gates, past lawns washed green by late spring, toward the great stone house that had once looked to her like the last door in England anyone would open. This time, the door opened before she knocked. Halcombe stood there with the same solemn face, but his bow carried no alarm. Lady Beatrice, he said. His Grace is expecting you. The words moved through her gently. Expecting, not rescuing. Waiting, not commanding. Behind her, Lady Rowena descended from the carriage with her cane and an expression of satisfaction she did not trouble to conceal. Do not look so moved, my dear. Butlers become insufferable if they know they have participated in symbolism. Halcombe's mouth twitched in a manner nearly scandalous for a man of his office. Beatrice smiled, and the smile did not feel borrowed from courage. It belonged to her. Much had changed since London, though not as dramatically as scandal sheets preferred. Lord Percival had not vanished into flames or confessed in public repentance. Men like him rarely gave society that satisfaction. But Lady Southmere had closed her drawing-room to him, and 2 other houses followed within a week. Mr. Calder had begun the formal challenge to his trusteeship over Lady Helen's settlement, and Percival's authority, once spoken of as family duty, was now discussed in careful tones by men who disliked attaching themselves to failing reputations. Sir Alastair Morden had left London for a cousin's estate in Shropshire after discovering that doors could close more firmly than they opened. Lady Cecily had been sent to an aunt in Bath, where strict schedules, unfashionable assemblies, and the absence of admiring gentlemen were expected to improve her nerves. Beatrice had not rejoiced in any of it. She had simply slept one full night without waking to listen for footsteps. That had been triumph enough. Mrs. Wren met her in the hall, wiped her hands on her apron before remembering herself, and curtsied. "My lady, we have aired the blue room, though his grace said you might prefer the morning parlour." "The morning parlour will be very well." Beatrice paused, looking toward the staircase where she had once climbed soaked, shaking, and uncertain whether shelter could be trusted. "Thank you, Mrs. Wren. For that first night." The housekeeper's face softened. "A house is meant to keep out weather, my lady. People sometimes forget that includes the weather others bring with them." Lady Rowena cleared her throat. "If the household continues being profound, I shall require tea immediately." Tea was provided, naturally. It was taken in the morning parlour, where the windows faced east and the chairs had been arranged for comfort rather than inspection. Beatrice did not ask at once where the Duke was. She told herself she was patient. Lady Rowena told her she was transparent. At last, Halcombe appeared. "His Grace asks whether Lady Beatrice would care to walk in the gallery." Lady Rowena took a biscuit. "Lady Beatrice would." Beatrice rose, trying not to seem as though her heart had altered its pace. "Will you come?" "No. I have reached an age at which chaperonage is best performed by being very near and very unwilling to climb stairs unnecessarily. The gallery door will remain open. Do not become foolish." Beatrice's cheeks warmed. "We shall endeavour to remain historically respectable." "See that you do." The gallery was warmer than she remembered. Afternoon light lay across the floorboards in wide gold panels, and the ancestral faces seemed less severe now that one of their secrets had been returned to its proper place. Adrian stood near the portrait that had once faced the wall. He turned when she entered, and for a moment neither of them spoke. He looked as he always did at first glance, composed, exacting, darkly dressed, every line of him trained by rank and restraint. But Beatrice knew now where restraint ended and feeling began. She saw the quiet in him. The effort. The hope he did not presume to show too openly. "Lady Beatrice," he said. "Your Grace." His brow lifted faintly. "Still." For another few minutes, perhaps. That almost smile touched his mouth and vanished, though not before she saw it. He gestured toward the portrait. "I thought you should see it placed properly." She came to stand beside him. The late Duke looked out from the frame with tired, steady eyes. The blue ribbon at the edge of the painted table was no longer hidden beneath cloth. Below the portrait, on a small carved stand, rested a polished wooden box. Beatrice knew what lay inside before Adrian opened it: her mother's letter, now carefully dried and preserved between sheets of thin paper, the faded blue ribbon from Valehurst, the receipt copied by Mr. Calder, and a new note written in Adrian's hand and signed by Beatrice. A simple account of what had been found, and what would not be buried again. "I did not place it among Harrowmere papers," Adrian said. "Not without your consent." "I know. It can remain with you. It belongs here too." She touched the edge of the box, not the fragile letter. "Not as a trophy. As witness." Adrian closed the lid gently. "Your mother gave truth to you. You gave it breath." The words entered her quietly, settling where old shame had once lived. She looked up at the portrait. "For years I thought loyalty meant keeping silence for the dead. And now?" Now I think loyalty means letting them be known accurately. Adrian's gaze rested on her, and when he spoke, his voice had changed. It carried no public authority, no drawing room steel. Only a man measuring his own heart before offering it. I asked you here today for 2 reasons. The first is practical. Mr. Calder has prepared a settlement in your name, independent of marriage, independent of Valehurst, and beyond Lord Percival's reach. It will not affect your choices. It is meant to protect them. Beatrice turned to him fully. Adrian. It was the first time she had used his Christian name. The sound changed the air between them. He went very still. I will not be purchased away from fear. No, his answer was immediate. Nor purchased toward me. That is why it is arranged whether you accept anything else from me or not. She studied him then, the man who had once thought protection meant removing her from view, the Duke who had learned in public that love without respect becomes another form of command. You have changed, she said. Not enough. Enough to know that? His mouth softened. Perhaps. He drew a breath, and she saw that courage was not only for women fleeing storms. Sometimes it was for powerful men who had to set aside the armor that made them powerful. The second reason is not practical. Beatrice's fingers tightened lightly around the edge of the box. No. No, he stepped back, giving her space even as his whole expression moved toward her. The storm brought you here once because every other door had failed you. I am asking whether peace may bring you back. She did not answer quickly. He did not ask her to. Beyond the open gallery door, somewhere below, Lady Rowena's voice rose in complaint about weak tea, proving respectability remained alive and vigilant. Beatrice almost laughed. Then she looked at Adrian and felt the long road behind them, rain, fear, breakfast silence, the first letter opened, Cecily's whisper, the scandal sheet, the inn parlour, Phoenix Cottage, Valehurst Strongbox, Lady Southmere's drawing room, and the moment he had apologized before everyone because her dignity mattered more than his pride. Are you asking me to be Duchess of Harrowmere? She said. I am asking you to be Beatrice, in any house that bears my name. Her breath caught. That is a better answer. It is the only one I have. And if I continue to disagree with you, then I will have the benefit of correction. If I wish to spend part of each year overseeing my mother's settlement and the tenants at Valehurst, then Harrowmere horses will learn the road. If I refuse to become a symbol of reconciliation every time society wishes to congratulate itself, then society may endure disappointment. The smile came then, full and unguarded, and it made his composure falter. Not collapse. Falter, in the most human way. Beatrice stepped closer. Then yes, she said. Not because you opened a door in a storm. Because you learned not to close one in the name of protecting me. Adrian's eyes closed briefly, as if relief required privacy. When he opened them, he did not seize her hand. He offered his. She placed hers in it. The touch was simple, gloved, proper, and more intimate than any declaration made too soon could have been. He bowed over her hand, not as a duke granting favor, but as a man receiving trust. I love you, he said quietly. I should have said it less like a verdict and more like a request, but there it is. Her laugh trembled. It's a little late to become smooth, Adrian. Thank heaven. I would be very poor at it. I love you too. The words felt strange only because they were free. He held her hand for one breath longer, then released it before propriety had to remind him. Together, they looked at the portrait, the wooden box, and the strip of blue ribbon painted long ago by someone who could not have known how much truth one color would carry. Later, the county would call. London would soften its voice and pretend it had never doubted her. Invitations would return, folded in better paper. Beatrice would answer some and ignore others. She had learned the difference between being seen and being displayed. For now, she stood beneath the roof that had once sheltered her from weather and now welcomed her by choice. In the box below the portrait, the letter lay dry at last, its blue wax faded but unbroken, keeping witness in the house where hatred had ended and a woman's voice had finally been allowed to remain.